Dinner was quiet, save for the faint clinking of cutlery against plates. I had cooked that night, steak and roasted vegetables, one of Amelia's favorites. She didn't comment on it, though. She hadn't commented on much lately. Her phone rested beside her plate, lighting up every few minutes with notifications she didn't bother to hide. I watched her across the table, trying to read her expression. She seemed distant, her eyes unfocused, her movements robotic. It wasn't unusual these days, but tonight, something about her felt different. There was an edge to her detachment, like she was waiting for the right moment to speak. And then, without warning, she did. I don't regret spending the night with Richard. Her voice was calm, deliberate. She didn't look at me when she said it, her eyes fixed instead on the glass of wine she was swirling in her hand. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her. But then the weight of her words hit me, cold and sharp, like a blade pressed to my skin. I set my fork down slowly, the sound of it against the plate louder than it should have been. I studied her, my face carefully blank, even as the room seemed to tilt slightly. "What did you just say?" My tone was quiet, almost conversational. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing any cracks in my composure. She finally met my eyes, a smirk tugging at the corners of her mouth. "You heard me." It was a challenge, one she thought she'd already won. That smirk, so small, yet so loud, made my stomach churn. I took a sip of my wine, letting the silence stretch between us. She watched me, clearly expecting a reaction, but I gave her none. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, cradling the glass in my hand, as if her words had been nothing more than a passing remark about the weather. "How very bold of you," I said, my voice steady. "Was it worth it?" She didn't flinch. If anything, her smirk deepened. "Yes," she said, her tone dripping with defiance. "Richard knows how to make me feel alive. Something you haven't done in years." Ah, there it was. The jab, the justification. I had anticipated it, but hearing it still felt like being punched in the chest. I nodded slowly, taking another sip of wine as I absorbed her words. "Good to know," I said finally, setting the glass down with deliberate care. "I'm glad he could provide you with that experience." She blinked, clearly taken aback by my calmness. "That's all you have to say?" "For now," I said, meeting her gaze. "But don't worry. By morning, I'm sure you'll have plenty to regret." Her smirk faltered then, just for a second, but she quickly recovered. "You're always so measured, Liam. So composed. It's exhausting. Maybe that's why Richard feels so refreshing. He's not afraid to show some passion." "Passion," I repeated, the word heavy with disdain. "Is that what you're calling it? Passion? Or was it just poor judgment wrapped in cheap thrills?" Her jaw tightened, the first crack in her armor. Good. She wasn't as untouchable as she thought. The rest of the meal passed in tense silence. I finished my steak methodically, refusing to let her see even a flicker of the storm brewing inside me. She pushed her food around on her plate, her confidence waning with every passing minute. By the time we cleared the table, she seemed restless, her smirk long gone. "I'm going to bed," she said abruptly, grabbing her phone and heading upstairs without another word. I stayed in the kitchen, pouring myself another glass of wine and leaning against the counter as I replayed the conversation in my mind. Her words echoed in my head, but it wasn't anger I felt. It was clarity. She thought she had the upper hand, that her admission had given her some kind of power. But she didn't realize who she was dealing with. I wasn't the passive, complacent husband she'd convinced herself I was. Not anymore. As I drained the last of my wine, a plan began to form in the back of my mind. Amelia might not regret her actions now, but by the time I was done, she would. Regret would cling to her like a shadow, following her every step. And Richard? Well, he'd learned that crossing me was the worst mistake he'd ever make. With a steady hand, I rinsed my glass and placed it in the sink. Tomorrow would bring a reckoning. But for tonight, I let the silence of the house settle around me, a calm before the storm I was about to unleash. The morning after Amelia's confession dawned with an unnatural quiet. She had already left for work by the time I got out of bed, leaving behind the faint scent of her perfume and an untouched cup of coffee on the counter. I stood there for a moment, staring at the mug, the events of the previous night replaying in my mind. Her words, so casual, so cutting, were like a loop I couldn't turn off. I don't regret spending the night with Richard. The memory sent a fresh wave of anger coursing through me, but I tamped it down. Anger wouldn't get me anywhere. I had learned long ago that patience was the most potent weapon in moments like these. Amelia had laid her cards on the table, bold and reckless. Now it was my turn to play mine, quietly, deliberately, and with precision. I started with the obvious. Amelia had been slipping away from me for months, but I hadn't allowed myself to see it clearly until now. The late nights at the office, the last-minute business trips, the way she had started dressing a little sharper, paying a little more attention to her makeup, her perfume. At first, I chalked it up to her career. She had always been ambitious, striving for the next big promotion. But now I could see the signs for what they really were. The classic markers of an affair. Richard. The name was a bitter taste in my mouth. I'd never met the man, but I knew of him. Amelia had mentioned him a few times in passing, always with a glint of admiration in her eyes that, at the time, I had mistaken for professional respect. "He's brilliant," she'd said once, a faint smile playing on her lips. "He has this way of commanding a room, you know?" No, I didn't know. And now, I wasn't sure I wanted to. The rest of the day passed in a haze of half-formed thoughts and calculated restraint. I went about my routine as though nothing had changed, but inside, my mind was working overtime. Amelia thought she had caught me off guard with her admission, but she didn't realize I'd been paying attention, watching, observing, connecting the dots. That evening, I decided to test the waters. When Amelia came home, she was distracted, her phone buzzing incessantly with notifications. She set it face down on the counter, but not before I caught a glimpse of the name flashing on the screen. Richard. "How was work?" I asked, keeping my tone light as I set the table for dinner. "Fine," she replied, a little too quickly. "Busy, as usual." "Anything interesting happen?" I pressed, sliding a plate of pasta onto the table. She hesitated, her gaze flickering toward her phone for the briefest moment. "Nothing worth mentioning." I nodded, sitting across from her. "Must be exhausting, working so closely with someone like Richard. He seems intense." Her fork paused midair, her eyes snapping to mine. "What do you mean?" "Just an observation," I said with a shrug, taking a sip of water. "You've mentioned him a few times. Seems like he's a big deal at the company." She relaxed slightly, though the tension in her shoulders didn't completely disappear. "He is. He's the kind of leader who expects excellence, which can be a lot of pressure." I smiled faintly, leaning back in my chair. "Sounds like he keeps you on your toes." Her expression shifted, almost imperceptibly, but I caught it. A flicker of something. Guilt? Anxiety? Whatever it was, it told me I was on the right track. After dinner, she retreated to the living room, her phone glued to her hand. I stayed in the kitchen, pretending to clean up while keeping an eye on her from the corner of my eye. The way she smiled at the screen, the way her thumbs moved quickly across the keyboard. It didn't take a genius to figure out who she was texting. I felt a pang of something I couldn't quite name. Not jealousy, exactly, but a deep, simmering anger. Not just at her, but at myself. How had I let it get this far? How had I missed the signs until now? But self-pity wasn't going to solve anything. If Amelia wanted to play this game, I'd meet her on the board. I'd find out everything there was to know about her and Richard. Every lie, every betrayal, every moment they thought they could keep hidden. And when the time was right, I'd make sure she regretted every choice she'd made. For now, though, I kept my calm. I stayed patient. She thought she was in control, but the truth was, I had already begun to unravel the web she and Richard had spun. And soon enough, she'd realize just how much I had been paying attention. I began my quiet investigation into Richard with the kind of focus I used to reserve for high-stakes projects at work. This wasn't just about satisfying my curiosity or even about Amelia's betrayal anymore. No, this was about him. This man who had strolled into our lives, turned my wife into a stranger, and presumed he could walk away unscathed. The first thing I discovered about Richard was how easily people sang his praises, at least on the surface. He was the kind of man who left a lasting impression. Slick, charming, with a razor-sharp wit that seemed to disarm anyone in his presence. In the corporate world, that charm had propelled him to the top. He wasn't just Amelia's boss. He was the face of her company's success, the man who knew how to turn every meeting into an event and every deal into a victory lap. But I wasn't interested in the Richard everyone else saw. I was looking for cracks in his armor, and it didn't take long to find them. The first clue came during an unassuming conversation with Clara, my sister and closest confidant. Clara worked in a different industry but had an uncanny ability to pick up on corporate gossip. When I mentioned Richard's name casually, her expression immediately shifted. "Richard Bowman?" she asked, her brow furrowing. "The big-shot CEO?" "That's the one," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "I've heard things about him. Rumors, mostly, but let's just say he's not as polished as he looks." "Go on," I urged, my interest piqued. Clara hesitated for a moment before continuing. "A friend of mine used to work at one of his previous companies. She said he has a reputation for using people, mostly women. He's the kind of guy who makes promises he doesn't keep, dangles opportunities just out of reach, and then cuts ties when things get messy." It wasn't exactly a revelation, but it confirmed what I had already begun to suspect. Richard wasn't just some harmless flirtation for Amelia. He was a man who thrived on manipulation. My next step was reaching out to Ethan, a friend of mine who worked in corporate compliance. Ethan was discreet, the kind of guy who could find information without leaving a trail. When I asked him to dig into Richard's professional history, he didn't ask questions. A few days later, he called me back. "You were right to be suspicious," Ethan said, his tone serious. "Richard has a history of questionable practices. He's been involved in 3 different companies over the past decade, and each time, there's been some kind of fallout. Lawsuits, accusations of harassment, even an SEC investigation into insider trading at one point." "Anything recent?" I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. "There's a lot of smoke, but no fire, at least nothing concrete. He's good at covering his tracks. But if I were you, I'd keep digging. Men like him always leave something behind." It was exactly what I needed to hear. Richard wasn't untouchable. He just thought he was. The more I uncovered, the more I began to see the bigger picture. Richard's interest in Amelia wasn't purely personal. It was strategic. She wasn't just another conquest for him. She was a valuable asset, someone he could use to further his own ambitions. Through some casual conversations with Amelia, carefully orchestrated to seem innocent, I learned that she was leading a high-stakes project for the company, one that could make or break their next quarter. Richard's been so supportive, Amelia mentioned one evening, her tone almost defensive. "He really believes in me." I bit back the urge to scoff. Of course he believed in her. She was the key to his success, the golden ticket he couldn't afford to lose. But Amelia didn't see it. Or maybe she didn't want to. She was caught up in his world, dazzled by his charm, and too blind to see the strings he was pulling. It infuriated me, not just because of what it meant for our marriage, but because of what it meant for her. She was smarter than this. Or at least, I thought she was. I knew then that confronting Richard head-on wouldn't be enough. I needed to expose him for what he really was, not just to Amelia, but to everyone who had ever fallen for his lies. And to do that, I needed more than rumors and whispers. I needed proof. Richard might have thought he could manipulate his way through life without consequence, but he was about to learn that he had met his match. I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to dismantle everything he had built, piece by piece. And when it was over, he would regret ever stepping into my world. The cracks in Amelia's perfect facade began to show not long after I started my quiet investigation into Richard. She had always carried herself with an air of confidence, especially when it came to her career. But lately, her posture seemed less certain, her smile a little too forced. It was as though the weight of her choices she thought she could control, was finally beginning to catch up to her. I watched from the sidelines, careful not to tip my hand. Confronting her directly wouldn't achieve anything. She was too defensive, too wrapped up in the fantasy of Richard's charm to see the truth. But I could tell something had shifted. Her once frequent name-dropping of Richard during dinner conversations had all but disappeared. When I casually asked how work was going, she'd respond with a clipped, "Fine," and quickly change the subject. What she didn't know was that I already knew why. Richard was beginning to show his true colors, just as I'd predicted. Men like him couldn't keep the mask on forever. They thrived on control, and once they felt their grip slipping, the cracks in their facade became impossible to hide. Through my discreet network of allies, Ethan, Clara, and even Lila, I'd started piecing together the threads of Richard's unraveling. Amelia was still leading the high-profile project that had first drawn Richard's attention, but the pressure was mounting. Deadlines were being missed, client expectations were spiraling out of control, and Richard, ever the opportunist, was shifting the blame onto her. What had once been his unwavering support had turned into thinly veiled criticism, delivered in front of her colleagues with a precision that left her humiliated and scrambling to defend herself. One evening, she came home looking more exhausted than I'd seen her in years. Her usual sharpness was dulled, her eyes shadowed with fatigue. She poured herself a glass of wine and sank into the couch without a word. I waited a moment, studying her, before breaking the silence. "Tough day?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. She exhaled heavily, staring into her glass. "You could say that. Richard giving you a hard time?" I pressed, careful to keep the question casual. Her head snapped up, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Why would you say that?" I shrugged. "Just a hunch. You've been working closely with him, right? Sometimes those relationships can get complicated." Her jaw tightened, and she looked away. "It's nothing I can't handle." I let the subject drop, but her reaction told me everything I needed to know. The pedestal she placed Richard on was crumbling beneath her, and she didn't know how to reconcile the man she'd idealized with the reality of who he was. What she didn't realize was that Richard's treatment of her wasn't just about the project. Through Lila, who had quietly been gathering intel while keeping up the pretense of a friendly relationship with him, I learned that Richard had already started cultivating a replacement. A younger, more malleable employee who lacked Amelia's experience but was eager to please. It was his pattern, his modus operandi. Amelia had served her purpose, and now he was preparing to discard her. It would have been easy to gloat, to confront Amelia with everything I knew and force her to see the truth. But I resisted the urge. She wasn't ready to face it yet, and I needed her to come to that realization on her own. If I pushed too hard, she'd retreat further into denial, clinging to the fantasy of Richard even as it fell apart around her. Instead, I bided my time, watching as the cracks widened. I noticed the way her confidence faltered during conversations, the way she hesitated before answering questions about work. I saw her flinch when her phone buzzed with yet another late-night email from Richard, the once thrilling urgency of his attention now a source of dread. One night, as she sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at her laptop, I leaned against the doorway and crossed my arms. "You look like you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders," I said lightly. She didn't look up. "It's just work," she muttered. "It'll pass." "Will it?" I asked, my voice soft but pointed. "Or is this something bigger?" Her fingers paused on the keyboard, but she didn't respond. For a brief moment, I thought she might open up, might finally admit that things weren't as perfect as she'd made them out to be. But then she shook her head and went back to typing, shutting me out once again. I walked away, letting her stew in the silence. The truth was closing in on her, and I didn't need to force it. Richard's mask was slipping, and soon enough, Amelia would see him for who he really was. When that moment came, I'd be ready, not just to expose the full extent of his manipulations, but to remind her of the price of betrayal. For now, I waited. The unraveling had only just begun. Patience has always been my greatest strength. Amelia thought she could keep her secrets tucked away, safe behind her carefully curated lies and late nights. But I had been playing this game longer than she realized, and with every passing day, the web around her, and Richard, grew tighter. It started with small, deliberate moves. Lila, who had taken on the role of my quiet ally, continued her feigned friendship with Richard, meeting him for coffee and casual conversations. The man thought he was untouchable, and his arrogance made him careless. He would lean back in his chair, talking about his vision for the company, casually dropping hints about the people he used and discarded along the way. Lila recorded every word, and piece by piece, his true nature began to emerge. He's already scouting someone to replace Amelia, Lila told me one evening over the phone. There's a new hire. Young, eager, completely naive. He's grooming her to take over Amelia's role. I clenched my jaw, the anger simmering just beneath the surface. It was exactly as I'd expected. Richard had built his entire career on manipulation, and now he was preparing to throw Amelia under the bus. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had betrayed me for him, and now she was the one being betrayed. Meanwhile, Ethan had been digging into Richard's professional dealings. He uncovered questionable contracts, conflicts of interest, and a trail of disgruntled employees who had quietly been paid off to keep their mouths shut. It was a damning collection of evidence, and we were only just scratching the surface. Richard's good at covering his tracks, Ethan said during one of our late-night strategy calls. But he's not perfect. There's enough here to raise questions, especially if it comes to light at the right time. I nodded, already envisioning how I could use the information. Richard's empire was built on sand, and it wouldn't take much to bring it crashing down. But the most significant piece of the puzzle came unexpectedly. One afternoon, Clara called me with an edge of urgency in her voice. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "I just got off the phone with an old colleague of mine, someone who used to work with Richard. He's been pulling the same stunts for years. And get this, one of his previous victims is willing to talk." Her name was Hannah. She had been in a position similar to Amelia's, a rising star in her company, seduced by Richard's charm and promises of mentorship. But once she outlived her usefulness, he had cut her loose, tarnishing her reputation in the process. She had spent years rebuilding her career, and though she had moved on, the scars of Richard's betrayal remained. "I'll talk to her," I told Clara. "If she's willing to share her story, it could be the final piece we need." Meeting Hannah was a sobering experience. She was calm, composed, but there was a sadness in her eyes that spoke volumes. As she recounted her experience with Richard, I felt my anger solidify into resolve. This wasn't just about Amelia or my marriage anymore. This was about exposing a man who had built his success on the broken lives of others. "He thinks he's untouchable," Hannah said, her voice steady. "But men like him always slip up. He'll make a mistake. And when he does, you have to be ready." Her words stayed with me as I continued to gather evidence, each piece bringing me closer to the moment I had been waiting for. I knew I couldn't rush this. Richard was slippery, and if I moved too soon, he'd find a way to twist the narrative in his favor. But with Ethan, Clara, Lila, and now Hannah on my side, I was building a case that even he couldn't escape. At home, Amelia was unraveling. She came home later and later, the tension in her shoulders visible even from across the room. She didn't talk about Richard anymore, but I could see the cracks forming. He was pulling away from her, just as he had with Hannah and countless others before her. And though she hadn't admitted it yet, I knew she could feel it. One night, as she sat on the couch, staring blankly at her laptop, I walked into the room and leaned against the doorway. "You look tired," I said, my voice casual. She glanced up at me, her eyes hollow. "It's just work," she muttered. "Richard's been demanding." I nodded, letting the silence stretch between us. "You know," I said finally, "people like him always demand more than they give. And when they're done, they move on without a second thought." Her head snapped up, her expression a mixture of surprise and defensiveness. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Just an observation," I said with a shrug, turning to leave the room. "Good night, Amelia." As I walked away, I could feel her eyes on me, the weight of my words hanging heavy in the air. She was starting to realize the truth. About Richard, about herself, about the choices she had made. The web was tightening, and soon enough, there would be no escape. For either of them. By the time I started putting the pieces into motion, the path ahead was clear. Richard wasn't just a man who had wormed his way into my marriage. He was a man who thrived on control, manipulation, and destruction. And now, he was about to learn what it felt like to have the tables turned. I couldn't do it alone. This wasn't a battle that could be won by brute force or a heated confrontation. It required strategy, precision, and allies who understood the stakes. That's where Ethan, Clara, Lila, and Hannah came in. Each of them brought something different to the table. Ethan's meticulous research, Clara's connections, Lila's inside access, and Hannah's first-hand experience with Richard's methods. The plan started to take shape during one of our late-night strategy calls. We met at Clara's apartment, the quiet hum of the city outside providing the perfect backdrop for the discussions that unfolded. Clara poured us all coffee as Ethan spread out a folder of documents on the table. "Here's what we have so far," Ethan began, gesturing to the papers. Financial discrepancies in Richard's previous companies, a string of HR complaints that were quietly buried, and evidence of unethical practices in his current role. It's not enough to bring him down completely, but it's enough to raise questions. "And questions are all we need," I said, leaning forward. "We're not going for a knockout punch. We're going to dismantle him piece by piece." The others nodded, the tension in the room thick but focused. Hannah spoke up next, her voice steady but laced with a quiet intensity. "I can share my story publicly, but it has to be timed perfectly. If we release it too soon, he'll spin it as a personal vendetta. But if we wait until the evidence builds, it becomes undeniable," Clara finished, her eyes narrowing. "He won't be able to escape it." Lila, who had been unusually quiet, finally chimed in. "He's getting careless," she said. "I've been meeting with him regularly, and he's already making moves to replace Amelia. He's confident, arrogant, and completely unaware that I'm onto him." Her words lit a fire inside me. I had suspected Richard's plans to discard Amelia, but hearing it confirmed only deepened my resolve. He had underestimated her, and me, for the last time. The first step of the plan was simple: expose Richard's manipulations within the company. Using the documents Ethan had gathered and the accounts from Hannah and others, we compiled a dossier that painted a clear picture of Richard's pattern of behavior. Lila helped leak the information to key figures within the company, trusted colleagues who were already wary of Richard's methods. The whispers started almost immediately, growing louder with each passing day. Meanwhile, I focused on Amelia. I didn't confront her directly, but I planted seeds of doubt every chance I got. Subtle comments about trust, loyalty, and the consequences of poor decisions. I could see the tension in her shoulders grow with each passing day, the cracks in her confidence widening as she began to realize that her golden savior wasn't as untouchable as she believed. But the real turning point came when we learned about an upcoming corporate gala, a high-profile event where Richard planned to announce a major business deal. It was the perfect opportunity to strike. The plan for the gala was meticulous. Lila would keep Richard distracted, feeding his ego with just enough flattery to ensure he didn't suspect a thing. Ethan and Clara would work behind the scenes, ensuring that the leaked documents made their way to key attendees. And Hannah would be ready to step forward if the moment called for it, her story serving as the final nail in Richard's coffin. As for me, my role was simple: stay calm, stay composed, and wait for the right moment to confront Amelia. I didn't want her blindsided by what was about to unfold, but I also didn't want to tip her off too soon. She needed to see the full scope of Richard's downfall to understand just how deeply she had been deceived. The night before the gala, I found her sitting in the living room, her laptop open but untouched. She looked up as I entered the room, her expression guarded. "Big night tomorrow," I said casually, pouring myself a drink. She nodded, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve. "Yeah, Richard's been stressed. He wants everything to go perfectly. Doesn't he always?" I replied, taking a sip. "But you know what they say about perfection. It's usually hiding something." Her eyes darted to mine, a flicker of something. Guilt? Fear? Crossing her face. She opened her mouth to respond, but I didn't give her the chance. "Good luck tomorrow," I said, my tone deliberately neutral. "It should be an interesting night." As I left the room, I felt the weight of her gaze on my back. She didn't know it yet, but the world she and Richard had built was about to come crashing down, and I would be there to watch every moment of it unfold. The night of the gala had a strange electricity in the air, the kind that tightens your chest and makes you hyper-aware of every detail. I'd spent weeks planning this moment, but now that it was here, I felt calmer than I had in months. This wasn't just a battle for my marriage or my dignity. It was a reckoning for Richard, a man who thrived on deceit and manipulation. Tonight, he would finally face the consequences of his actions. Amelia and I arrived together, a picture-perfect couple on the surface. She wore a stunning black dress, her smile practiced and poised, but I could sense the tension behind it. She hadn't said much on the drive over, and her grip on her clutch was tighter than usual. I wondered if some part of her knew what was coming, if she could sense the storm gathering just outside her line of sight. The gala itself was a grand affair, held in one of the city's most opulent venues. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the room, and the buzz of conversation filled the air. Richard was already there, of course, basking in the attention as though he were the guest of honor. He stood near the center of the room, holding court with a group of executives and board members. His charisma was on full display, his laughter echoing above the crowd like a performer confident in his act. I stayed on the edges at first, watching, waiting. Ethan, Clara, and Lila were already in position. Ethan had made sure the dossier, containing the damning evidence of Richard's unethical practices, had been distributed to key players in the room earlier that day. Clara was mingling effortlessly, subtly steering conversations toward Richard's questionable history. And Lila? Lila was with him, playing her part perfectly, her laughter soft and conspiratorial as she kept him occupied. Hannah arrived quietly, slipping into the room unnoticed. She wore a simple dress, her demeanor calm but determined. We exchanged a brief nod across the room. She knew her role, and I trusted her to play it when the time was right. The evening unfolded like clockwork. Dinner was served, speeches were made, and the anticipation built as Richard prepared to make his big announcement. Amelia stayed close to me, but her focus was elsewhere. Her eyes darted toward Richard every few minutes, and I could see the unease creeping in. She wasn't sure what was wrong, but she could feel it, like the moment before a thunderstorm when the air grows heavy and still. Finally, the moment came. Richard took the stage, his confidence radiating as he addressed the room. He spoke about the company's success, his vision for the future, and the groundbreaking deal they were about to close. The crowd applauded, their admiration palpable. But then, as he was basking in the applause, the first ripple of discontent spread through the room. It started with a whisper. A phone screen illuminated here, a hushed conversation there. The dossier had begun to circulate, its contents undeniable. Emails detailing Richard's manipulations, records of financial discrepancies, and testimonials from former employees painted a damning picture of the man standing on the stage. Richard faltered, his smile slipping as he noticed the shift in the room. His voice wavered slightly as he continued his speech, but the whispers grew louder, the tension thickening. And then, Hannah stood. "I'd like to say something," she said, her voice clear and steady. All eyes turned to her, and Richard froze, his hand tightening around the microphone. Hannah stepped forward, her gaze never leaving Richard's. "You talk about vision and leadership, but the truth is, you've built your success on lies. You've used people, manipulated them, and discarded them when they were no longer useful. I know because I was one of them." The room went silent, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the air. Richard opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, Clara stepped in. "There's more," Clara said, holding up a printed copy of the dossier. "Everything you need to know about Richard Bowman is in here. His financial misconduct, his unethical behavior, his pattern of abuse. It's all documented." The floodgates opened then. Questions, accusations, murmurs of disbelief filled the room. Richard tried to regain control, his voice rising in desperation, but it was too late. The evidence was overwhelming, the witnesses too credible to dismiss. His carefully constructed image was crumbling before his eyes. Amelia stood frozen beside me, her face pale as she watched the scene unfold. She turned to me, her voice barely a whisper. "Did you?" I met her gaze, my expression unreadable. He did this to himself. Richard stormed out of the room shortly after, his departure marked by a deafening silence. The gala continued, but the energy had shifted. The guests no longer spoke of deals and successes. They spoke of betrayal and downfall. As for Amelia, she didn't say much on the drive home. She stared out the window, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I let the silence linger, knowing she had a lot to process. Tonight, she had seen Richard for who he truly was. And by morning, she would have to face the full weight of her choices and their consequences. The morning after the gala was unsettlingly quiet. The kind of quiet that wraps around you like a fog, heavy and suffocating. I woke up earlier than usual, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of the previous night. Richard's carefully crafted world had come crashing down in a spectacular, public fashion. And Amelia? She'd been caught in the wreckage. When I finally got out of bed, I found her sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee untouched in front of her. She was still in her robe, her hair pulled back into a messy bun. She didn't look at me when I entered, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers trembled slightly as they gripped the edge of the mug. "Morning," I said casually, pouring myself a cup of coffee. She didn't respond, just stared down at her coffee as though it held answers she desperately needed. I sat across from her, taking a slow sip and letting the silence stretch. I wasn't going to be the one to break it. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Did you know?" "Did I know what?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. She looked up at me then, her eyes red-rimmed and brimming with something I couldn't quite place. Anger? Sadness? Guilt? About Richard. About everything that happened last night. I set my cup down carefully, meeting her gaze. "I had an idea," I said. "It wasn't hard to figure out, Amelia. The signs were all there." Her expression crumpled, and she pressed a hand to her forehead. "I didn't see it. I didn't see any of it. How could I have been so stupid?" I leaned back in my chair, watching her closely. "Because you didn't want to see it. You let yourself believe in the version of Richard that he wanted you to see. The charming, supportive boss. But last night? That was the real Richard." She flinched at my words, her hand dropping to her lap. "You don't have to rub it in, Liam." "I'm not rubbing it in," I said evenly. "I'm telling you the truth. Something Richard clearly never did." She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "You must think I'm pathetic. Falling for his lies, letting him manipulate me." I didn't respond immediately. Truthfully, I didn't know what I thought anymore. Part of me wanted to agree with her, to throw her betrayal back in her face. But another part of me, a part one wasn't sure I trusted, felt something close to pity. "What I think," I said after a long pause, "is that you made a mistake. A big one. And now you have to decide what you're going to do about it." Her gaze snapped to mine, her eyes narrowing. "What am I supposed to do, Liam? My reputation is ruined. My career is probably over, and I've lost everything." "Everything?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Is that what you think? That you've lost everything?" She hesitated, her cheeks flushing. "I didn't mean—" "You didn't mean me," I finished for her, my voice sharp. "Of course not. Because in all of this, you never once considered what you were throwing away. Our marriage. Our trust. You didn't lose everything, Amelia. You gave it away." Her lips parted as if to argue, but no words came out. She looked away, her hands clenching into fists on the table. For a moment, I thought she might cry, but she didn't. Instead, she took a deep breath and straightened her spine, as though bracing herself for a battle she knew she couldn't win. "You're right," she said finally, her voice quiet but steady. "I made a mistake. I let him get into my head, and I let him ruin everything I worked for. But I'm not going to let him destroy me." There it was, the fire I hadn't seen in her for months. The woman who had built a successful career, who had once been my partner in every sense of the word, was still there. She was just buried under layers of guilt and regret. "I hope you mean that," I said, standing up and taking my coffee with me. "Because rebuilding what you've broken won't be easy. And it won't happen overnight." She didn't reply, but I saw the determination in her eyes as I left the room. For the first time in months, I felt a sliver of something that might have been hope. Not hope for us, not yet, but hope that Amelia could find her way back to herself. Over the next few days, The fallout from the gala continued to unfold. Richard was facing an internal investigation, his career hanging by a thread. Amelia, meanwhile, started taking small steps to rebuild her life. She resigned from her position at the company, cutting ties with the man who had nearly destroyed her. At home, things were tense. We spoke in short, clipped sentences, careful not to venture into dangerous territory. But there were moments, small, fleeting moments, where I saw glimpses of the woman I had fallen in love with. A joke shared over dinner. A quiet thank you for a cup of tea. They weren't much, but they were enough to keep me from walking away. For now, that would have to be enough. The days after Amelia resigned were marked by a strange calm in our house. The chaos of the gala and the fallout with Richard had subsided, leaving us in a liminal space, somewhere between the wreckage of the past and the uncertainty of what came next. I wasn't sure where we stood, but for the first time in months, I could see that Amelia was beginning to grasp the weight of her choices. I woke up one morning to find her in the living room, surrounded by stacks of papers and her laptop. She was still in her pajamas, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, and there was an intensity in her expression that I hadn't seen in years. She didn't notice me at first, too focused on whatever she was working on. I leaned against the doorway, watching her for a moment before finally speaking. "Starting a new project?" I asked, my tone deliberately casual. She looked up, startled, and for a second, I saw something like guilt flash across her face. But then she straightened, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Something like that," she said quietly. "I'm trying to figure out my next step." I walked over and glanced at the papers scattered across the coffee table. Resumes, notes, a list of potential companies she could apply to. It was clear she wasn't just sitting in her guilt. She was planning, rebuilding. Leaving the company was the right choice, I said, sitting down across from her. "But what about everything else? Have you thought about what you're going to do to fix that?" Her hands paused over the keyboard, and she met my gaze. "If you're asking whether I've thought about us, the answer is yes. I think about it constantly." "Thinking about it isn't enough, Amelia," I said, my voice steady but firm. "You can't undo what happened. But if you want to move forward, you need to take accountability. Not just with me, but with yourself." She nodded slowly, her lips pressing into a thin line. "I know," she said. I'm trying. I've been journaling, and I've started looking for a therapist. I know I need to understand why I let things with Richard happen before I can even think about asking you to forgive me." Her honesty caught me off guard. For so long, she had been defensive, dismissive, unwilling to acknowledge the depth of her betrayal. But now, for the first time, she seemed willing to face it head-on. It didn't erase the damage, but it was a start. "I don't need perfection, Amelia," I said after a long pause. "But I need to see effort. Real effort. If you're serious about fixing this, then I'm willing to try too. But you have to meet me halfway." She looked at me, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. "I will, Liam. I promise. I'll do whatever it takes." The rest of the day passed quietly, but something had shifted between us. It wasn't a reconciliation, not yet, but it was a step toward one. Later that evening, as we sat together on the couch watching a movie, I felt a tentative sense of hope. For the first time in months, it felt like we were on the same side, both fighting to rebuild something that had been broken. Amelia wasn't perfect, and neither was I. But maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to move forward. Together. It's strange how silence can feel heavier than words. In the days that followed our tentative conversation in the living room, Amelia and I existed in a fragile truce. We didn't fight. We didn't push. Instead, we orbited around each other cautiously, like two people walking on cracked ice, unsure which step might send us plunging into the cold. Amelia spent most of her time focusing on herself, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw her putting in real effort. She started therapy, as she had promised, and came home from her sessions with an expression that was a mix of exhaustion and relief. At night, she would sit on the couch with a journal, her pen moving furiously across the pages as though she were trying to exorcise her guilt onto paper. I didn't ask what she wrote. I wasn't ready for that level of vulnerability from her, and maybe she wasn't ready to share it. Instead, I watched from a distance, letting her take the steps she needed to take while keeping my own boundaries firmly in place. But even as she worked to rebuild herself, there was a part of me that remained guarded. Could we really fix this? Could I ever look at her and not see Richard's shadow lingering in the background? The questions haunted me, and the answers felt maddeningly out of reach. One evening, as we sat in the living room, her with her journal, me with a book I wasn't really reading, she broke the silence. "I talked about you in therapy today," she said, her voice soft but steady. I looked up, surprised. "Oh." She set her journal aside, folding her hands in her lap. "My therapist asked me why I was so drawn to Richard, why I let myself ruin what we had for someone like him." I stayed silent, giving her the space to continue. "And I realized something," she said, her gaze fixed on her hands. "It wasn't about Richard at all. It was about me, about my own insecurities, my need for validation, my inability to face the parts of myself that felt broken." Her words hung in the air, raw and unpolished, but they felt honest in a way I hadn't expected. I closed my book, leaning forward slightly. "And what about us?" I asked. "Where do we fit into that?" She looked up then, her eyes meeting mine. "You were always steady, Liam. Always there. But I took that for granted. I stopped appreciating you, stopped appreciating what we had, because I was too caught up in chasing something that didn't matter. I see that now, and I hate that it took losing so much to realize it." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she quickly wiped at her eyes, as if embarrassed by the tears. "I don't know if I can forgive you yet," I said, my tone measured. "It's going to take time. And honestly, I don't know if we'll ever get back to what we were before." "I don't want what we had before," she said quietly. "I want something better, something honest." That admission hit me harder than I expected. For the first time, it felt like we were speaking the same language, both of us acknowledging the pain, the betrayal, but also the sliver of hope that we might be able to build something new. Over the next few weeks, things didn't magically fix themselves. There were still moments of tension, still nights when the memories of what had happened threatened to pull me under. But there were also moments of connection, small, tentative steps toward healing. A shared laugh over a silly TV show, a quiet walk in the park, a conversation that felt more honest than anything we'd had in years. Amelia wasn't the same person she'd been before Richard, and neither was I. But maybe that was okay. Maybe this new version of us, scarred but still standing, was worth fighting for. And as I sat next to her one evening, our hands brushing but not quite touching, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. I never saw it coming. That night changed everything in a way I could hardly imagine. After 3 years of marriage, when Isabel, my wife, invited me to dinner with her friends, a rare gesture that I clung to as a hopeful sign, I dressed in my best suit and set out with a heart full of cautious optimism. I had always believed that these moments, small as they might seem, could bridge the growing distance between us. As I adjusted my tie and looked in the mirror, I tried to convince myself that this dinner was our chance to rediscover the bond we once shared. I arrived at the restaurant 2 minutes late because of a stubborn parking spot, and even that brief delay seemed to set the tone for the evening. The moment I stepped through the door, I sensed a shift in the air. The restaurant, usually warm and inviting, felt oddly detached. I scanned the room until I saw Isabel sitting with her friends, Lila and Bianca. Instead of greeting me with the warmth I had hoped for, she offered only a half glance before returning to her animated conversation. I took my seat, trying to mask the sinking feeling in my chest with a forced smile. I joined the conversation hesitantly, eager to be part of something I believed was important to her. But every time I tried to speak, she cut me off with a dismissive tone. I remember the moment when I complimented her dress, a simple remark meant to acknowledge her beauty, and she scoffed and muttered, "You should worry about your own looks." That single sentence, delivered with cold detachment, echoed in my ears as her friends exchanged subtle glances and stifled their laughter. Throughout the dinner, the atmosphere grew heavier with each passing minute. I struggled to contribute meaningfully, feeling increasingly like a spectator in a show where I was no longer the main character. The table became a stage for undermining comments and side-eye glances. I watched in disbelief as the woman I had once adored systematically dismissed my attempts at conversation, each remark chipping away at the foundation of our shared past. Every word I uttered was met with a look of disinterest, as though my very presence was an inconvenience, a relic of a bygone era that no longer belonged in her new life. When the waiter discreetly slid the bill across the table, a feeling of finality washed over me. Without a hint of remorse, Isabel pushed the bill toward me. Leaning in with a smirk that cut deeper than any knife, she declared, "You know what? I don't think this is working. I deserve better. A man like you should be grateful I even married you." In that chilling moment, the world around me slowed to a painful crawl. The words, so casually spoken, felt like a verdict, one that not only shattered the remnants of our shared history, but also erased any hope of reconciliation. Her friend's quiet laughter rang in my ears, each note a confirmation of my deepest fears. I sat there, staring at the $350 bill that now symbolized the cost of my shattered pride and the end of something I once believed was real. In the silence that followed, I was overwhelmed by a cold, calm acceptance. I replayed every moment in my mind, trying desperately to understand how the evening had taken such a drastic turn. I questioned every smile we had shared over the years, every tender word that now felt like a lie. The dinner had been more than just a meal. It had been an unraveling, a public display of disregard that left me exposed and vulnerable. Each second felt interminable, a mix of disbelief and sorrow that slowly settled over me like a shroud. As I sat alone amid the remnants of our former life, I began to see the bitter truth. She thought this was over, that our years together were now nothing more than a collection of memories destined to fade. Yet, in the midst of my despair, a strange clarity emerged. I recognized that the painful end of that night was not solely a loss, but also the beginning of something new, a chance to redefine myself and reclaim the parts of me that had been overshadowed by the weight of false promises. I left the restaurant with a heavy heart, the cool night air outside contrasting sharply with the warmth of the table we had once shared. Driving home slowly, I allowed my mind to wander over the events of the evening, each memory a stepping stone toward a future that, while uncertain, held the promise of self-discovery. In the solitude of that long drive, every red light and every quiet stretch of road became a moment of reflection. I realized that the dinner disaster was not just an end, but a painful, necessary beginning. I began to understand that the truth, however harsh, was a liberating force. It stripped away the illusions that had masked our life together and forced me to confront the reality of who I was. Sitting in my car under the vast, starry sky, I promised myself that I would face the days ahead with honesty and determination, even if it meant accepting the painful truths of that fateful evening. The scars of that night would remain, but they would also serve as reminders of a time when I learned that even in the darkest moments, there is a path forward, a path that belongs solely to me. After I left the restaurant, the bitter taste of that night still lingered as I drove home. I paid the bill without a word and let the dark sky mirror the heaviness inside me. Once home, I sat on my worn-out couch and poured myself a drink, my hands trembling as I tried to sort through every painful detail of the evening. I replayed the memory of that disastrous dinner, the sneers, the mocking glances, and especially her cold words, and wondered how the woman I thought I knew could turn so callous in public. The anger and hurt mingled with disbelief as I tried to comprehend the reality that had unfolded. I scrolled through my phone, searching for answers, when it began to ring incessantly. My call log revealed 13 missed calls coming from unfamiliar numbers. When I finally answered a call from one of them, I heard the shaky voice of Isabel's mother, sounding both distraught and confused. Soon after, messages came in from her sister and even her best friend, Bianca. It wasn't Isabel reaching out, though. Instead, her family was trying to piece together what had really happened, each call intensifying the feeling that the truth was far from what I had witnessed. In the solitude of my apartment, I felt the weight of isolation. I knew this wasn't the first time Isabel had thrown hurtful words my way, but never before had I experienced such blatant public humiliation. That night had been a carefully orchestrated scene where I had been set up as the fool in front of everyone she held dear. I felt betrayed not just by her, but by the web of lies she had spun around me over the years. Seeking answers, I decided to log into her social media account, a decision born out of a need for confirmation rather than revenge. There it was, as if to punctuate the tragedy, a selfie taken at the restaurant, accompanied by a caption that read, "Starting fresh. New beginnings." Red heart, the irony was crushing. The very woman who had once promised me love and loyalty now celebrated what looked like a new start, leaving me to question everything we had built together. My mind churned with memories of happier times and whispered promises that now felt like distant echoes. I could hardly believe that the woman I had trusted so deeply had rewritten our entire story. Isabel had always been a master of performance, but I had never imagined that her mask would slip so publicly. I began to recall subtle hints over the years, small inconsistencies in her words, offhand remarks that I had dismissed as mood swings. Now, each memory came back with a harsh clarity, revealing a pattern of deception that had been slowly, deliberately woven into the fabric of our marriage. As I sat there, lost in thought, I realized that the lies extended far beyond that single dinner. Her carefully curated narrative had deceived not only me, but her entire circle, family, friends, even colleagues who trusted her every word. The realization stung deeply. While I had been trying to mend a relationship that I thought was fading, Isabel was busy constructing an elaborate illusion that painted me as the villain of our shared story. Every call and every message on my phone seemed to confirm that I was not the only one caught in the aftermath of her deceit. The more I delved into my own thoughts, the more I felt a sense of urgency to uncover every hidden truth. It was as if the hurtful laughter of her friends at that fateful dinner was now echoing in my ears, urging me to confront the layers of lies she had built. I decided that I would not let her narrative go unchallenged. In that moment of dark clarity, I promised myself that I would piece together the fragments of our past and reveal the truth, no matter how painful it might be. That night, as I took slow sips of my drink and reflected on the harsh reality of the events, a determination began to replace the numbness in my heart. I realized that in exposing the deceit, I could reclaim a part of myself that had been buried under years of manipulation and denial. The lies that had once seemed so immovable were now crumbling under the weight of undeniable evidence. And with every passing minute, I felt a spark of hope ignite amidst the ruins of our shattered marriage. I knew the road ahead would be difficult, laden with painful confrontations and emotional revelations. But as I stared at the phone in my hand, still buzzing with unanswered calls and messages, I vowed to myself that I would uncover every lie and, in doing so, rediscover the truth about who I was and what I truly deserved. The lies were starting to unravel, and with them, I sensed the beginning of a journey toward freedom and self-discovery. A journey I was now determined to take, no matter how steep the path might be. After the shock of that painful evening and the weight of unanswered calls, I found myself in a restless state of mind. The questions swirled around me like a storm I could not calm. That night, as I sat in the dim glow of my living room lamp, my thoughts turned over every word and every look that had passed between Isabel and me over the years. I began to wonder if there were hidden layers to her behavior that I had never bothered to question. The realization hit me gradually, like pieces of a puzzle slowly fitting together. I recalled moments when she had casually dismissed my efforts to contribute, when she had waved off my opinions in front of others with a cool arrogance that I had once mistaken for confidence. Now, in the bitter light of reality, those moments seemed like deliberate brushstrokes in a larger, more sinister painting. I decided then to search for more than just the painful memories of our dinner. I needed to uncover the truth behind the mask she had worn for so long. The next day, while still reeling from the public humiliation, I found myself unable to shake the nagging feeling that Isabel had been hiding something far deeper than mere discontent. I reached out to Leo, my coworker, and one of the few people who had ever hinted at knowing the real Isabel. His voice trembled with reluctance as he warned me that there was more to her story than I had ever imagined. "Man, I don't know if I should tell you this," he had said, his words heavy with unspoken truths. "But Isabel's been saying some wild things about you at her office. You might want to look into it." At first, I brushed off his words as just another attempt at softening the blow. But as I mulled over his tone and the careful way he had delivered his message, I began to sense that there was a hidden agenda at work. Determined to uncover the truth, I started piecing together small details from conversations, overheard remarks, and even a few suspicious glances exchanged between her close friends. It wasn't long before the picture began to darken. Isabel, it seemed, had been crafting a narrative about our marriage that painted me in a far worse light than I ever imagined. She had told her family that I was a lazy husband who never helped out around the house, despite the fact that I had always taken care of the bills and managed our expenses. With every conversation I recalled, I realized that her words had slowly isolated me from the people who once believed in the goodness of our union. I started to connect the dots, the dismissive looks, the carefully chosen words, and the subtle insinuations that I was controlling and insecure, claims that were entirely at odds with my own recollections of our life together. It became clear that Isabel was not only distancing herself from me, but she was also reshaping the story of our marriage in the eyes of those who mattered most to her. In her world, I had become the villain, and she, the misunderstood victim who had been forced to make a desperate choice. As I sifted through these revelations, I felt as though I were trapped in a maze of deception, where every turn revealed yet another lie carefully constructed to justify her actions. I began to look back on every minor detail that once seemed insignificant. The way she would dismiss my input in planning our weekends, the subtle smirks when I offered a suggestion, and even the fleeting moments when her eyes held a hidden meaning, a meaning that I had once interpreted as playful banter but now reeked of calculated manipulation. It was as if she had been rewriting our past and present, deliberately turning my genuine attempts at connection into evidence of my supposed shortcomings. Every conversation with her family, every interaction with her friends, now felt like a piece of a larger performance where I was cast in the role of a bumbling fool. The more I learned, the more I realized that Isabel's deception extended far beyond the confines of our private disagreements. Her carefully maintained facade had infiltrated every corner of our shared life, convincing even those closest to her that I was the one at fault. The idea that she had been lying about me for years was a bitter pill to swallow, yet it was also strangely liberating. It meant that I was not alone in my pain. Others had seen the cracks in the story she told, and I was not the only one betrayed by her carefully spun web. Armed with this unsettling knowledge, I felt an urgency to confront the false narrative head-on. I began to document every recollection, every conversation that hinted at the truth behind her lies. My mind raced as I planned how to expose the deceit, not for the sake of revenge, but to finally reclaim my identity from the twisted version of events she had imposed on our lives. Each memory was like a thread in a vast tapestry of deception, and I was determined to pull at them until the entire fabric unraveled. The challenge was immense, as I knew that once the truth emerged, it would shatter the illusion that Isabel had so carefully constructed. But even as fear gripped me at the thought of the fallout, I also felt a growing sense of resolve, a resolve that promised a future free from the chains of her lies. That day, as I sat alone with my thoughts and a notebook filled with scribbled notes, I realized that the web of deception was not just a collection of isolated incidents. It was a deliberate, systematic effort to control the narrative and turn everyone against me. I felt both angry and strangely empowered, knowing that the truth was slowly emerging from the shadows of her falsehoods. With each piece of evidence I gathered, I took a small step toward reclaiming the life I had once thought was secure. In the quiet of my home, amidst the echoes of a past filled with both love and betrayal, I resolved to unmask the lies for good. The road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but as I closed my notebook and looked out at the fading light of day, I knew that I was ready to face the consequences of uncovering a truth that had been hidden for far too long. That night, as the last vestiges of our ruined evening echoed in my mind, my phone rang unexpectedly. I recognized the number immediately. It was Isabel's mom. Her voice, usually soft and measured, came through with a surprising intensity and anger. "What is this nonsense Isabel is telling me?" she demanded, her tone laced with disbelief. "That you were begging her not to leave? That you were financially unstable?" I could hear the hurt and frustration in her voice, and despite my own pain, I knew I had to be honest. I told her everything. The cruel words at the dinner, the humiliating glances, the calculated dismissal that had cut deeper than any physical blow. Every detail spilled out, and with each word, I felt a mix of sorrow and liberation. I explained how, all these years, I had labored under the weight of a marriage that was slowly being dismantled by lies, and how tonight was the breaking point. After I finished, her tone softened a fraction as she absorbed the truth. It was then she mentioned something that stunned me further. Isabel's family was expecting me at her father's upcoming birthday dinner. I paused, letting her words sink in. The invitation made no sense. If our marriage was truly falling apart, why would they expect me to be there? It became clear in that moment that Isabel had hidden something from them. She had not told her family about our impending divorce. Instead, she was forcing them to believe that everything was perfectly normal, that her image of the ideal wife was intact. She was lying to them, manipulating every conversation to maintain her crafted persona. The realization hit me hard. I was not just facing a personal betrayal, but also a web of deceit that spanned every interaction she had with the people closest to her. In that dark hour, I decided that I would not confront her directly with anger or bitterness. Instead, I would let the truth emerge naturally, like a river breaking through a dam built on lies. I resolved to attend the birthday dinner, not to stage an explosive confrontation, but to gently let the facts speak for themselves. I began planning how I would navigate that dinner, determined to reveal the reality of our marriage without creating a spectacle. In the days that followed, I spent countless hours rehearsing the words I would say, the tone I would use, and the calm expression I would maintain. I envisioned sitting at the dinner table surrounded by family members who had been unwittingly caught in Isabel's carefully spun narrative. I thought of her father's proud smile, her mother's gentle reassurances, and even her sister's knowing glances. Each moment was now a potential platform for the truth to emerge. I knew that once the truth was out, no amount of denial could restore the false image Isabel had built. I was not seeking revenge or confrontation for its own sake. I simply wanted to reclaim my dignity and allow everyone to see the real story behind the facade. Every detail of our past replayed in my mind. Those quiet moments when Isabel's dismissive attitude seemed trivial at the time now revealed themselves as deliberate acts of manipulation. I began to connect the dots. Every slight remark, every cold glance had been a piece in the puzzle of deception that she had constructed. I felt a growing sense of resolve as I documented these memories, each one a silent testament to the truth that had been hidden for so long. I reminded myself that the perfect plan was not to launch an all-out attack, but to allow the slow, inevitable process of revelation to dismantle the lies piece by piece. I spent long nights writing down my recollections in a journal, ensuring that every incident was recorded in simple, honest language. The act of writing became therapeutic. It was a way to process the betrayal while also preparing myself for the din. I reviewed each note repeatedly, understanding that when I shared these details, they would not be mere accusations but undeniable evidence of the reality we had both been living. The plan was to let the truth emerge naturally. I would only state what I knew, calmly and clearly, without adding any extra emotion. I believed that truth, presented simply and directly, would resonate more deeply than any shouted outburst or bitter retort. In my heart, I knew that attending the birthday dinner was more than just an opportunity to clear my name. It was a turning point in my life. It was the moment when I would no longer be the victim of a carefully orchestrated performance. I decided that my approach would be to remain calm and composed, allowing every subtle detail to speak for itself. I was not going to mirror the anger that Isabel had shown that night. Instead, I would be the embodiment of quiet strength and honesty. I wanted her family to see that I had always acted with integrity, even when the truth was obscured by her lies. I reached out to a close friend who had listened patiently to my story, and his simple words of encouragement bolstered my resolve. "You have my full support. It's time for your truth to shine." His reassurance reminded me that this journey was not mine alone, that there were others who believed in the value of honesty and integrity. Every day, as I prepared for the dinner, I visualized the moment when the web of deceit would unravel, when every family member would finally see the reality behind the perfect wife act. I was determined to let the truth come out, piece by piece. until there was no room left for the false narrative that Isabel had so meticulously built. On the eve of the dinner, I sat alone in my room, the quiet enveloping me as I went over my plan one final time. I thought about the stakes, not just my own reputation, but the trust and understanding that had been compromised in our shared history. I knew that revealing the truth would be painful for everyone involved, yet it was a necessary step toward healing. The perfect plan was not about winning an argument. It was about setting things right, about allowing the truth to flow and break the chains of lies that had held us captive for so long. In that reflective silence, I promised myself that no matter how challenging the conversation might become, I would remain steadfast in my commitment to honesty. I was ready to face the consequences of unveiling the hidden truths of our marriage. I had learned that sometimes the bravest act is not to fight fire with fire, but to stand in the light and let everything be seen. With this conviction warming my spirit, I finally felt prepared to attend the birthday dinner, ready to let the truth emerge naturally and, in doing so, to reclaim a part of myself that had been overshadowed by years of deception. I arrived at her parents' house feeling a mix of determination and sorrow, knowing that the evening would be a turning point in a story that had long been shrouded in lies. As soon as I stepped through the door, I was met with warm greetings that felt almost too familiar. Isabel's father clapped me on the back with the easy camaraderie of someone who believed nothing was amiss, while her mother pressed a gentle kiss to my cheek as if to offer reassurance. Even her sister, with an inquisitive smile, casually asked about our big news, as though we were sharing some joyful announcement. That warmth stung me. Each friendly word was a reminder of the life we once had, a life now overtaken by deception. I took a deep breath and tried to steady the storm raging inside me, knowing that soon the carefully built facade would crumble. 10 minutes later, the front door opened, and there she stood. Isabel, looking pale and as though she had seen a ghost, entered the room with hesitant steps. Her eyes, wide and troubled, darted around the room as if searching for an escape from the situation she had created. I could tell from the way her hand trembled slightly when she reached out to me that she had not expected my presence here. "Can we talk in private?" she whispered, her grip on my arm tight and desperate, as if clinging to the last remnants of control. In that moment, I felt a surge of calm resolve. Instead of retreating into the shadows of hurt and bitterness, I met her unspoken plea with a smile that I hoped conveyed both compassion and the certainty of truth. I raised my voice just enough for everyone within earshot to catch my words, declaring, "Oh, don't worry, we'll talk. After all, we have some big news to share." The room fell into a stunned silence, and I saw her face drain of color as the weight of my announcement settled in. That simple statement, delivered with quiet authority, was like a key turning in a lock. I could see the realization dawning on her. She had never planned for this day to come. Every carefully orchestrated moment of our past now felt like a stage performance destined to be unraveled. I could almost hear the murmur of disbelief from her family, who had been unwitting participants in the elaborate drama of our marriage. Each sympathetic glance and tentative inquiry from those around us underscored the growing tension, and I sensed that the truth, long buried beneath a veneer of perfection, was finally ready to surface. I led her to a quiet corner of the room, away from the prying eyes and ears of her family, yet my earlier declaration had already set the stage. As we sat down, I took a moment to gather my thoughts. I knew that the conversation ahead would be painful, not only for Isabel, but for everyone who had been deceived by the narrative she had spun so carefully over the years. I began by recounting the events of that disastrous dinner, my voice steady even as each word reminded me of the public humiliation and the crushing blow of her dismissive tone. I explained how her friends' laughter and the dismissive glances that had punctuated our interaction were not random or isolated incidents, but part of a pattern that had slowly eroded the foundation of our marriage. With each detail I shared, I felt the burden of secrecy lift from my shoulders. I spoke simply and honestly, not with the aim of inflicting pain, but with the need to set the record straight. I told her about the missed calls that had filled my phone the next morning, about the concerned voices of those who had known us both, and about the sting of seeing her so eager to start a new beginning on social media. As I unraveled the layers of deception, I could see that the truth was beginning to take shape in the eyes of those who had gathered in the living room. Her father's expression hardened with realization, and her mother's face contorted with sorrow as the reality of our situation sank in. I watched as Isabel's confident mask faltered, replaced by a mix of regret and panic. The carefully maintained image of a perfect wife was now shattered before everyone's eyes, and I felt a bittersweet satisfaction knowing that the long-hidden truth was finally emerging. Even as I recounted the details of her words and actions, I felt a profound sadness for what we had lost, a bond eroded not by a single moment, but by years of secrets and lies. Yet, in that sadness, I also discovered a strange sense of freedom. I was no longer confined by the false narrative that had kept me silent for so long. The conversation between Isabel and me grew increasingly raw and real. Her whispered defenses fell short against the clear evidence of her betrayal, and every pause in our dialogue was filled with the weight of unspoken truths. I realized that this unmasking was not meant to be an act of revenge, but rather an honest confrontation, a necessary step toward healing for both of us, regardless of what came next. In that moment, as I looked into her eyes, I knew that the damage was irreversible. The bond we once cherished had been replaced by a chasm filled with distrust and regret. Yet, by laying everything bare in that living room, I hoped that we could both begin the process of rebuilding, even if it meant walking separate paths. The family around us listened with a mix of shock and compassion, their earlier enthusiasm for a happy celebration now replaced by somber understanding. Every face in the room was a silent witness to the unraveling of a lie that had bound us together for far too long. As the final words of our private conversation faded into the charged atmosphere, I felt a profound sense of closure, a closure that was painful but necessary. In exposing the truth, I had reclaimed not just my own dignity, but also the chance for a future unburdened by the weight of deception. The dinner began with an uneasy calm that belied the tension thick in the air. I sat at the long dining table in the softly lit living room of Isabel's parents' house, my eyes fixed on the carefully arranged plates and glasses as I tried to steady the turmoil within. Despite the warm smiles and gentle greetings from everyone, I could feel that the family's joy was built on a fragile foundation of lies. As the meal progressed, I sensed the anticipation in the room, as if everyone was waiting for a spark to shatter the uneasy peace. It wasn't long before the moment arrived. Isabel's father, a robust man whose laughter used to fill the room during our happier times, raised his glass for a toast. His voice, deep and resonant, carried a hopeful note as he congratulated us on working things out and hinted at a future of renewed understanding. I listened, my heart pounding in my chest, knowing that beneath his words lay a truth that was soon to be unveiled. In that moment of forced celebration, I could no longer keep silent. I cleared my throat, drawing the attention of everyone around the table. My voice, though calm, carried an edge that resonated in the stillness. Actually, I began, I must tell you all something important. The murmurs around me died down, and every eye shifted toward me. I continued, last week, during a dinner at a restaurant, Isabel made it clear that she no longer wanted to be with me. She dumped me right in front of her friends. She said I should be grateful that she even married me. I could feel the weight of every word as it sank into the stunned silence that followed. A gasp came from her mother, her eyes widening in disbelief. The room seemed to pause as if time itself had slowed. Isabel's father's face, usually so full of mirth and pride, turned stern and pained as he processed my words. Her sister shifted uncomfortably in her seat, and even those who had laughed earlier now wore expressions of regret and shock. Isabel, who had once been the orchestrator of our shared illusion, sat there stunned, her face a mask of confusion and panic. I reached for my phone from the table, my hand trembling slightly, and scrolled to find the post that had confirmed my worst fears, a selfie posted by Isabel at the restaurant with the caption, "Starting fresh. New beginnings. Red heart." I held up the phone for all to see, ensuring that there could be no misunderstanding. The evidence was there for everyone to witness. I spoke slowly, letting each word fall heavily in the silence of the room. This is not a misunderstanding. This is the truth of what happened. I have always done my best in our marriage. Yet tonight, I stand here to show you all the reality that has been hidden from you. The reaction was immediate and palpable. Some family members exchanged uneasy looks, while others visibly recoiled from the stark revelation. Her mother's eyes shimmered with a mix of sorrow and regret, as though she had been caught in a web of deception too long to notice. Her father's voice, usually steady and strong, wavered as he tried to process the betrayal unfolding before him. The room, once filled with the promise of celebration, had turned into a crucible of raw emotion and harsh truth. Isabel tried to interject, her voice cracking as she attempted to laugh off the situation, calling it a misunderstanding. But her words were drowned out by the silence that followed my declaration. I pressed on, explaining in simple terms the pain of public humiliation, the shock of betrayal, and the long history of subtle dismissals that had led to this moment. I made no attempt to embellish or exaggerate. I simply recounted the events as I remembered them, each detail a piece of the puzzle that had shattered our shared life. The tension in the room grew thicker with every passing moment. I could see that some family members were beginning to understand that the carefully constructed narrative Isabel had maintained was crumbling under the weight of undeniable evidence. Even as I spoke, my heart ached for the family that had been manipulated into believing a false version of events, and for the woman who had once been the center of my life, but now stood isolated by her own deceit. As the final words left my lips, a heavy silence settled over the dinner table. I looked around, meeting the eyes of each family member, silently asking them to see the truth that I had laid bare. In that charged atmosphere, there was no anger, only a deep sorrow and a lingering sense of inevitability. The birthday dinner, meant to be a joyful celebration of life and family, had turned into an unmasking of years of deception. I sat back in my chair, feeling both the weight of loss and a newfound relief that the truth was no longer hidden in the shadows. In that moment, as the echoes of my words filled the room, I knew that everything had changed. The blow of that bitter truth was undeniable, and even as the shock rippled through the gathered family, I felt an unwavering clarity. No matter how painful the revelations might be, this was a necessary step toward a future where honesty replaced falsehood and where each of us could begin to rebuild from the ruins of a once-believed perfection. I could feel the atmosphere shift immediately after the dinner table fell silent. The tension that had been building all evening exploded into raw emotion as Isabel's mask finally cracked. The weight of my words, the undeniable truth I had laid out for her family, seemed to break something deep within her. I watched as her eyes widened and her hands began to tremble. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words never came out clearly. Instead, she started to pace in the small space of the hallway, her footsteps echoing in the quiet room. I followed her, feeling both sorrow and a strange sense of inevitability as I prepared to face the aftermath of her unraveling facade. In a burst of anger mixed with despair, Isabel suddenly turned to me, her voice rising sharply. "How could you do this to us?" she demanded, her eyes brimming with tears that betrayed both rage and hurt. For a moment, I felt a flicker of regret. Perhaps there was a chance to mend what had been broken. But her next words cut through any hope of reconciliation. "You're twisting everything, making me look like the villain," she accused, her tone desperate as if trying to reclaim control over a situation that was spiraling out of her grasp. Her anger was no longer contained within polite boundaries. It was raw and unfiltered, and in that instant, I realized there was no turning back. She began to shout, blaming me for every misstep and every unspoken slight. Her voice shook with fury as she detailed every little grievance, accusing me of being cold, unloving, and completely out of touch with her needs. "You were never there for me," she cried, her words echoing down the empty corridor. "I did everything for us, and you never appreciated it." Her hands flailed as she tried to emphasize her point, and I could see the desperation in her eyes, a desperate attempt to regain the respect and love that had slipped through her fingers. I listened, feeling an overwhelming mixture of sorrow, disappointment, and a grim acceptance that nothing could reverse the damage. Every word she spat out felt like a piece of the carefully constructed image of the perfect wife crumbling before everyone's eyes. Yet, even as her tirade grew louder, I could sense an underlying vulnerability beneath the surface of her anger, a fragility that I had never seen before. It was as if the storm of emotions had stripped her of the armor she had so meticulously built over the years. In the midst of her fury, I spoke softly. Isabel, I am not the enemy here. I only want the truth to be known. My words hung in the air, almost drowned out by her continued outburst. But for a brief moment, I saw a glimmer of confusion in her eyes, as if she was struggling to reconcile the woman I knew with the image she had been projecting all these years. You think this is fair? She spat back, her voice cracking under the weight of her anger and sorrow. You're making me look like a monster in front of everyone. Her accusations were relentless, fueled by years of pent-up resentment and the sudden shock of being exposed. I took a steadying breath and reached out, though she recoiled as if my touch would burn her. I knew that this was not the time for physical comfort, but rather a moment for truth to echo louder than her desperate cries. I never wanted to hurt you, Isabel, I said, my voice quiet yet firm. All I ever wanted was honesty between us. I wanted us to be true to ourselves, even if that meant facing hard truths. My words, simple and unadorned, seemed to momentarily still the whirlwind of her anger. But it was too little, too late. The hurt in her eyes deepened, and she turned away sharply, as if unable to face the mirror of her own actions. Her meltdown continued as she stormed back into the living room, her sobs mingling with angry shouts. Family members, who had been silently absorbing every moment, began to murmur among themselves. I could see the conflict in her mother's face, torn between loyalty to her daughter and the dawning realization of the truth I had spoken. Her father stood rigid, his expression a mix of disappointment and disbelief. And all the while, I felt a strange calm settle over me, a stark contrast to the chaos that Isabel embodied. In that moment, I understood that the woman before me was not simply lashing out. She was crumbling under the immense weight of the lies she had spun for so long. Every accusation, every bitter remark was a desperate bid to salvage an image that was already in ruins. I realized that her meltdown was not solely about me. It was the collapse of a carefully maintained identity that had defined her for years. I continued to stand there, quietly absorbing her words, even as each one pierced the fragile remnants of what we had once shared. As the echoes of her shouts faded into an uneasy silence, I felt the finality of this moment settle in. The truth had been laid bare, and with it, the past was irrevocably altered. I knew that from here on, there was no turning back. Isabel's breakdown marked the end of a long period of denial and the beginning of a painful journey toward understanding our shattered reality. In that charged, silent aftermath, I could only hope that in time, the truth would not only heal the wounds in me, but also free her from the very lies that had consumed her. The morning light crept slowly into my apartment, bringing with it a heaviness that matched the sorrow inside me. I awoke to find my phone buzzing relentlessly. Each new message and missed call deepened the feeling of isolation that had been building since last night. As I reached for my phone, my heart sank further with each notification. Messages from Isabel's family, concerned and disappointed, poured in one after another. Her father's stern words, her mother's soft apologies, and even her sister's hesitant expressions all came through in those texts. It was as if the shock of last night's events had rippled out into a waking world that was now trying to make sense of everything. I sat on the edge of my bed and scrolled through the messages, feeling the weight of every word. They spoke of anger, regret, and a deep sense of betrayal, but they also carried hints of sympathy and a desire to understand what had really happened. I knew then that the truth I had shared at the birthday dinner had changed things permanently. The once comforting background of polite smiles and affectionate greetings had been replaced by a raw and painful honesty. Later that morning, as I sipped a weak cup of coffee, I could not shake the feeling of emptiness that had taken root in my heart. Memories of the dinner, the public humiliation, and Isabel's shattering meltdown replayed in my mind like a broken record. I realized that the chaos of last night was not isolated. It was just the beginning of a long, difficult journey that would force me to confront many painful truths. In the hours that followed, I received a steady stream of calls and messages from people who had known Isabel for years. Some expressed shock that she would allow her carefully constructed image to crumble so publicly, while others seemed to regret having been part of the deception that had masked our real lives for so long. A few of these voices reminded me that the truth often comes with its own kind of redemption. I was told that Isabel's behavior over the past weeks had become increasingly erratic. Her social media, once a window into her carefully curated life, now posted cryptic messages and fragmented apologies that left her friends and family more confused than ever. At one point, I even learned that she had tried to reach out to me multiple times, her texts filled with desperate pleas and vague admissions of guilt. But I kept my distance, determined to let the truth that had been laid bare stand on its own, without the interference of frantic messages or half-hearted reconciliations. As the day wore on, the silence in my apartment grew deeper. I spent long hours staring at the blank walls, trying to process the events and the fallout that had followed. The sudden exposure of long-held lies had left me with a bittersweet sense of freedom, yet it was marred by the pain of loss. I thought back to all the times I had ignored the small signs of deception, each one now a painful reminder of how easily trust can be shattered. It was a lonely reckoning. In the quiet moments, I began to reflect on my own part in this unraveling story. I questioned whether I had done enough to see the truth, whether I had been too trusting or too willing to believe in a promise that was never fully mine. These reflections did not lead to self-condemnation, but rather a determination to move forward with greater honesty and clarity. As the day turned into afternoon, I decided to take a walk through the empty streets, hoping that the physical journey might help me process the emotional one. The crisp air and the steady rhythm of my footsteps offered a temporary reprieve from the tumult inside. Each step seemed to carry me away from the painful memories and closer to a future that, while uncertain, promised the chance for renewal. During that walk, I recalled simpler times, moments when Isabel and I had shared genuine laughter and hope, long before the web of lies had taken hold. The contrast between those memories and the harsh reality of now was jarring, yet it also reminded me that every ending brings with it the possibility of a new beginning. By the time I returned home, I felt a small but significant shift within me. The chaos of the previous night was still present, but I sensed that I was beginning to reclaim a part of myself that had been buried under the weight of betrayal. I resolved that day to face the coming challenges with a clear mind and an honest heart. I knew that healing would be neither quick nor painless, but it was necessary. I started by drafting a message, a simple note of thanks to those who had reached out, acknowledging their support while also affirming my decision to move forward on my own terms. In that moment, I understood that the aftermath was not just about the collapse of a marriage or the unmasking of deceit. It was also about finding strength in vulnerability, learning to accept the pain of truth, and slowly building a future that was grounded in genuine self-respect. With each passing minute, the storm of emotions began to settle, leaving behind a quiet determination. I was no longer defined solely by the betrayals of the past. I was now the keeper of my own truth, ready to embrace the uncertain road ahead. As I sat down once more in the silence of my apartment, I allowed myself to feel every emotion fully: grief, anger, regret, but also a growing hope that someday, these wounds would heal. The aftermath of the revelations had left scars, but in those scars lay the promise of renewal and the chance to rebuild a life that was true to who I was meant to be. In the weeks that followed the explosive dinner and the painful aftermath, a quiet transformation began to take place, a slow, steady closure that I never expected to find. I spent long hours sitting alone in my study, reflecting on the wreckage of what had once been our shared life. Each day brought new challenges and small victories, as I gradually learned to accept that the chapter with Isabel was ending for good. I remember one evening in particular. I sat by the window watching the last rays of sunlight fade over the quiet street, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. It was as though the universe was offering me a gentle reminder that sometimes endings make room for fresh starts. As the days turned into weeks, I began to hear from people who had been caught in the web of deceit. Friends of Isabel, who once had believed in her version of our life, slowly began to reach out with their own stories of regret and sorrow. I learned that some had witnessed subtle shifts in her behavior long before the truth had been forced into the open, whispers of doubts and glimmers of discontent that now seemed painfully obvious. Their words, spoken in quiet confidence, offered me both comfort and validation. It was as if the silence that followed the chaos was allowing me to gather the pieces of a broken past and reshape them into something that might one day become a new beginning. I spent many sleepless nights replaying every conversation, every moment when I had ignored the early signs of the impending collapse. With a heavy heart, I acknowledged my part in the slow decay of our relationship, yet I also recognized that I had given my best effort. In my journal, I began writing about the lessons I had learned, about trust, the importance of honest communication, and the need to listen not only to the words spoken, but also to the silences that speak volumes. I wrote about the sorrow of realizing that a person I loved could become a stranger through a series of lies and half-truths, and I allowed myself to mourn the loss of the future I had once imagined. These writings, raw and unfiltered, became a guide to understanding the real me, separate from the illusions that had defined our years together. Gradually, the relentless anger and bitterness that had once clouded my every thought began to dissipate. In its place, I found moments of unexpected clarity. I realized that closure was not a single, dramatic event, but a slow, ongoing process of healing. I started to see that the pain of betrayal, while still sharp, was now interwoven with hope, a hope that I could rebuild my identity and rediscover what it meant to live truthfully. I reached out to old friends and even joined a small community group where people shared stories of loss and recovery. In these humble gatherings, I found solace and a renewed sense of purpose. Their stories resonated with mine, each one a reminder that even the deepest wounds can eventually give way to growth. There were days when the memories still stung, a familiar song on the radio, a place we had once visited together, or even a casual remark that carried the weight of the past. But with every challenge, I grew more resilient. I began to set small goals for myself, learning a new skill, taking long walks in the park, and even rediscovering simple pleasures like reading a well-loved book. Each step was a declaration of independence from the past, a statement that I was no longer defined solely by the pain of betrayal. I recall one particularly crisp autumn day when I sat under a tree in a park, watching leaves dance to the ground. It struck me then how nature, with its cycles of growth and decay, perfectly mirrored my own journey. Just as trees shed their leaves to prepare for new growth, I was shedding the layers of hurt and disappointment. In that moment, I embraced the truth that closure was not about forgetting or erasing the past, but about accepting it as a necessary part of life's ever-changing story. Now, as I move forward with cautious optimism, I understand that true closure comes from within. It is the quiet strength found in self-reflection, the willingness to forgive, not just the other person, but also myself. I have learned that the end of one chapter is the fertile ground for the beginning of another. With each passing day, I feel more whole, more certain that I can face the future unburdened by the weight of old lies. And while the scars of our past may always remain, they serve as a testament to the lessons learned and the resilience of the human spirit. I am finally free to write the next chapter of my life, one that is guided by truth, self-respect, and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. It had been several months since that fateful birthday dinner, and slowly, life had begun to settle into a new rhythm, one that felt unfamiliar yet strangely liberating. I had learned to live with the scars of the past, finding small moments of joy in everyday routines, and slowly rebuilding the parts of myself that had been hidden behind pain and betrayal. I had started to embrace solitude and rediscovered simple pleasures. Early morning walks, long hours spent reading old books, and quiet evenings filled with music that spoke to my heart. The memories of our shared past with Isabel still lingered like shadows, but with each passing day, they lost a bit of their sting as I moved forward, piece by piece, reclaiming my identity. One crisp afternoon, while sitting at a corner table in a quiet cafe I had grown fond of, I looked up from the book I was reading and saw her. Isabel stood by the window, looking out at the busy street with an expression I couldn't quite read, a mix of weariness and regret. My heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, I felt the old, complicated emotions surge within me. It was as if time had reversed itself, and all the painful memories came flooding back. I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and tried to remember that I had changed, That the man who had once suffered public humiliation was now someone who had found strength in the truth. Isabel glanced in my direction, and for a split second, our eyes met. I saw something in hers, maybe remorse, or perhaps a longing for what once was, but I knew better than to fall into the trap of our former lives. Instead, I offered a gentle smile, not of warmth or invitation, but of acknowledgement and finality. I continued to sip my coffee, my heart steady despite the flutter of old emotions. The cafe was quiet, and for a long moment, time seemed to stand still as we both sat with our thoughts. The silence between us was heavy with history. I remembered all the long nights filled with doubts and the painful conversations that had led to our unraveling. I recalled the cold sting of her words at the restaurant, the betrayal that had rippled through every relationship in our lives, and the eventual acceptance that had come as the truth was laid bare. And now, here she was, standing before me in a moment that felt both unexpected and inevitable, a final encounter that would mark the end of our tangled past. Slowly, she approached my table, her steps hesitant as if she were afraid of disturbing the calm that I had so carefully nurtured. "Hello," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the hum of the cafe. I nodded in return, my own voice steady as I replied, "Hello, Isabel." There was no bitterness in my tone, only a quiet understanding that some encounters are meant to bring closure rather than reopen old wounds. We talked for a few minutes, exchanging guarded words about how life had changed since our separation. She spoke of regret and the mistakes she had made, of the isolation that followed when the lies finally crumbled. I listened, acknowledging her words with measured responses that came from a place of acceptance rather than resentment. In that brief conversation, I realized that the person who had once been my wife was now a stranger, a woman burdened by the consequences of her choices, and one who was, like me, trying to find a way forward. The conversation was not long, nor did it need to be. With every word exchanged, I felt the final pieces of our shared history falling away. I explained, in simple terms, that I had found peace in letting go, that I was grateful for the lessons learned even if they had come at a painful price. I told her that the man she had once known was no longer the same, that I had grown stronger and more true to myself after facing the harshest truths. Isabel listened, her eyes reflecting a mixture of sorrow and understanding, and in that silent acknowledgement, I knew that the time had come to let the past rest. As our conversation drew to a close, she hesitated before speaking again, as if searching for the right words to express a final farewell. I could see the weight of her regrets in her gaze, and for a moment, I wished her well, hoping that she too would find the path to healing. "I hope you find peace," she whispered, almost inaudibly, before turning away. I nodded, accepting her words as part of our shared goodbye. Standing to leave, I felt a calm certainty settle over me, a final closure that meant our stories, however intertwined for so long, had reached their natural end. I left the cafe with a quiet smile, the encounter serving as a gentle reminder that a man like me did not need to be grateful for the past. I was free to build a future defined by truth and self-respect. In that final moment, as I walked away into the soft glow of the fading afternoon, I knew that I had finally reclaimed my life, and with it, the promise of new beginnings. I should have known better. The moment I watched Laura buckle Jake into the back seat of her Lexus, something twisted deep in my gut, a familiar discomfort. The same unease I'd felt the day she left me for Greg, claiming she'd found a man more suited for the kind of life she wanted. The same feeling I'd had when I learned that she and Greg were already playing house before our divorce papers were even finalized. But I swallowed it, because Jake was excited. Disneyland, Dad. I get to see Spider-Man. His 6-year-old face was pure joy, practically bouncing in his seat. His oversized backpack was strapped to his shoulders, even though he didn't need it in the car. He wanted to be prepared. I crouched beside the open car door, tightening his seatbelt like I still had control over the situation, like I could somehow protect him even when I wasn't there. "You listen to your mom, okay? And stay close." "I will." "And if anything feels weird," I hesitated. What the hell was I supposed to tell a 6-year-old? That his mother was unreliable? That her new husband barely acknowledged him unless it was for a photo op? That his grandparents, Margaret and Richard, were were more interested in their social reputation than their own flesh and blood? I forced a smile instead. Just call me if you need anything. His little fingers wiggled free from under the backpack strap and did the Spider-Man web-slinging motion. I got this, Dad. I chuckled, ruffling his hair. He was brave. Too brave for his own good. Laura tapped impatiently on the steering wheel. David, can we not do the long, dramatic goodbye? We'll have him back by 8. Greg, sitting in the passenger seat, barely looked up from his phone. That man had the personality of wallpaper. I straightened, locking eyes with Laura. You'll send updates, right? She sighed. Yes, David. Pictures. Videos. A whole scrapbook if that's what you need. I knew her well enough to recognize the sarcasm, but I also knew she'd send the pictures, not for my peace of mind, but for her brand. She liked to play the devoted mother on social media. #blended family goals. The moment the car pulled out of my driveway, I had to fight the urge to call them back. Maybe it was paranoia. Maybe it was knowing her too damn well. But I had no choice. I had to trust them with my son. And that, I realized too late, was my biggest mistake. The day felt longer than it should have. I went through the motions, answering emails, sitting through meetings, making sure I looked engaged while my boss droned on about quarterly reports. But my mind was elsewhere. At 9 a.m., a photo popped up on my phone. Jake at Disneyland's entrance, arms spread wide, grinning ear to ear in his Spider-Man shirt. Laura and Greg flanked him, wearing perfectly curated smiles. Margaret and Richard were off to the side, looking more like they were posing for a country club event than a theme park trip. I exhaled. He looked happy. That was all that mattered. By 10:30 a.m., another picture came in. Jake with cotton candy. His face sticky, his excitement still going strong. At noon, a short video. Jake on a carousel, giggling. Then, nothing. No more updates. At first, I told myself they were just busy. It was Disneyland, after all. Probably long lines, rides, overpriced snacks. By 2 p.m., I started to feel it again. That same unease. I texted Laura. Hey, how's it going? Everything okay? No response. I called. It rang, straight to voicemail. That wasn't normal. Greg might be a self-absorbed prick, but Laura? She was glued to her phone. Always posting. Always scrolling. I checked her Instagram. The last post was the carousel video, 2 hours ago. Something was off. I tried calling again. Still nothing. And then, my phone rang. An unknown number. I hesitated before answering. Hello? A calm, professional voice spoke on the other end. Mr. Carter, this is John Martin from Disneyland Guest Services. We have your son here at the Lost and Found Center. For a moment, my brain refused to process the words. Lost and found? My son? I gripped the edge of my desk. What do you mean? He's with his mother. There was a brief silence before the staff member responded. Sir, his mother and her party left the park. Your son was found alone near Adventureland about 30 minutes ago. He was crying and couldn't find them. My body went ice cold. They left him? I forced myself to breathe, to stay calm. Is he okay? He's safe now, the staff member assured me. But he was very scared and confused when we found him. Scared. Confused. Because his own mother abandoned him. Rage. Pure, unfiltered rage. I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth ached. Can I talk to him? My voice was barely steady. Of course. One moment. There was a shuffle, then a small, sniffling voice came through the phone. Dad. I swallowed hard. I'm here, buddy. I'm right here. Dad, they left me. Those 3 words shattered something inside me. I gripped my phone tighter. What happened? We had lunch, and Grandma said, wait here for a minute. But they never came back. I kept waiting and waiting, and then I didn't know where to go. His voice broke. I was really scared, Dad. I closed my eyes. My 6-year-old. Alone. Abandoned in a theme park. My hands shook as I reached for my car keys. Jake, listen to me. I'm coming to get you right now. Stay with the staff, okay? Oh, okay. I love you, buddy. I'm on my way. I hung up. I didn't even bother packing my laptop or saying goodbye to my coworkers. I was already out the door. And as I sped toward Disneyland, One thought burned in my mind. Laura, Greg, Margaret, Richard. They had no idea what was coming. I don't remember leaving the office. One moment, I was at my desk, my fingers locked so tightly around my phone that my knuckles turned white. The next, I was already on the freeway, my car cutting through lanes faster than was probably legal. Jake was alone, abandoned, at a damn theme park. And his own mother had done this to him. A part of me kept thinking there had to be a mistake, a misunderstanding. No one leaves a 6-year-old child behind at Disneyland, not even someone as self-absorbed as Laura. But then I remembered her voice. Oh, really? Didn't notice. And Greg's arrogant little chuckle in the background. Good kids never get lost. They were laughing, like my son's fear. His tears were just another joke to them. A slow, seething rage burned through me. I took a sharp exit, barely slowing down as I merged into city traffic. It didn't matter how fast I went. I still felt too far away. And then, my phone rang again. An unknown number. I hit the Bluetooth button on my dashboard. Hello? Mr. Carter, this is Officer Daniel Ruiz with the Anaheim Police Department. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. What the hell? We received a welfare report regarding your son, Jake Carter, the officer continued. Disneyland security informed us that he was found alone. We're currently reviewing surveillance footage, but we wanted to speak with you directly. I inhaled sharply. Disneyland had called the police. Good. At least someone was treating this like the crime it was. I'm on my way to pick him up now, I said, my voice coming out rougher than I intended. We understand. Mr. Carter, we do have a few questions. I'll answer anything you need after I get to my son. The officer paused. Understood. Please check in with Disneyland security when you arrive. We'll have a unit there as well. I hung up and pressed harder on the gas. This wasn't just carelessness. This was neglect. This was criminal. And Laura? She was about to learn exactly how badly she had screwed up. By the time I pulled into the parking lot, I was running on nothing but pure adrenaline. I barely registered the castle in the distance, the laughter of happy families, the overpriced souvenir stands. None of it mattered. I just needed to find Jake. The Lost Children's Center was tucked away near Main Street, a small, quiet building where staff helped reunite kids with their families. If they had families that gave a damn. I shoved through the doors, and the woman at the front desk barely had time to look up before I was speaking. My name is David Carter. My son, Jake Carter, was brought here. Her expression shifted immediately. Oh, yes, sir. Just one moment. She gestured to a small waiting area. And there, curled up on a chair, hugging his Spider-Man backpack like a lifeline, was my son, Jake. His head snapped up. His big brown eyes widened. And the second he saw me, he burst into tears. I didn't even think. I dropped to my knees and pulled him into my arms. He clung to me, his little body shaking, his fingers digging into my shirt. I heard him mumble something against my shoulder. What, buddy? I pulled back just enough to see his face, brushing his messy hair out of his eyes. I thought you wouldn't come, he whispered. Jesus Christ. I had to swallow hard to keep my own emotions in check. I cupped his face, forcing him to look at me. Hey, I will always come for you. Always. Do you hear me? His lower lip trembled. He nodded. Did you eat anything? I asked gently. He sniffled. I had a hot dog, but I'm hungry again. I took a slow breath, trying to calm myself down. First priority, get Jake home. Get him food. Get him somewhere safe. Everything else would come later. A man in a Disneyland uniform approached me. Mr. Carter? I turned, still holding Jake. Yeah. My name is John Martin. I'm the security supervisor here. If you have a moment, we'd like to show you the surveillance footage. I felt Jake's fingers tighten around my sleeve. I looked down at him. Buddy, do you want to come? Or do you want to stay here? He hesitated. Then, gripping my hand, he whispered, I want to come. I kissed the top of his head. Okay, let's go. John led us to a small room with a monitor. He hit play, and what I saw made my blood boil. At 2:15 p.m., the footage showed Jake sitting at an outdoor restaurant in Adventureland. Laura was fixing her hair in the reflection of her phone, barely paying attention. Margaret adjusted her expensive silk scarf, glancing at Jake like he was a burden. Then, Laura stood up. She leaned down, patted Jake's head, and said something. John paused the video and zoomed in. The audio was clear. "Wait here, okay? We'll be right back." Then she, Greg, Margaret, and Richard walked away. Jake sat there, alone, waiting, for 30 minutes. At 2:45 p.m., another camera captured Laura and Greg exiting the park, laughing. Margaret and Richard were right behind them, carrying shopping bags. And my son was still sitting there, waiting. They never looked back. They never even hesitated. I heard Jake sniffle beside me. "I kept waiting," he whispered. "I thought they were coming back." I clenched my fists so tightly my nails dug into my palms. I turned to John, my voice sharp. "Can I get a copy of this footage?" He nodded. "Absolutely. We'll provide everything to the authorities as well." Authorities. Good. Because now, it was war. I left the security office with Jake's hand in mine, and the second I stepped outside, I called Laura. She answered on the second ring. "David, I'm in the middle of..." "Where the hell are you?" She huffed. "At home, obviously." "Why?" My grip tightened on my phone. Jake was left at Disneyland, alone, at the Lost and Found Center. I just picked him up. Silence. Then a laugh. She actually laughed. "Oh, really? Didn't notice." And in the background, Greg chuckled. Good kids never get lost. I saw red. I took a slow breath. Controlled. Deadly. "You really think this is funny?" My voice was calm, but she should have recognized the danger in it. She didn't. "David, stop being dramatic. He was fine, wasn't he?" I smiled. A dangerous, cold smile. "Oh, Laura," I said, voice low. "Yeah. You have no idea what's coming." And I hung up. The car ride home was quiet. Too quiet. Jake sat in the back seat, his tiny hands gripping the straps of his Spider-Man backpack like a lifeline. He hadn't let go of it since I picked him up from Disneyland's Lost and Found Center. His usual energy, his endless chatter about superheroes, dinosaurs, and whatever random fact he picked up that day was gone. Instead, he stared out the window, eyes unfocused, his face pale. I glanced at him through the rearview mirror. I hated this silence. "Buddy," I tried, keeping my voice gentle. "You okay?" His shoulders tensed before he nodded. A lie. I knew it, and he knew I knew it. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, forcing my voice to stay calm. "Steady. You don't have to talk if you don't want to," I said, keeping my eyes on the road. "But I'm here, okay?" Silence. And then, a whisper. "Dad?" I exhaled, relieved just to hear his voice. "Yeah, buddy?" He hesitated. I could see it. His little hands gripping the backpack tighter, his lips pressing together. Then, his voice broke. I thought you wouldn't come." The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. I sucked in a sharp breath. "Jake, why would you think that?" His lip trembled. He was trying to be brave, but he was still just a kid. A 6-year-old kid who had been left behind like he was nothing. "They said they'd come back," he whispered. "Grandma said, wait here." So I waited, and waited, and waited. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel. "But they never did," he continued, voice getting smaller. I kept looking around. People walked by, but no one was looking for me. I clenched my jaw so hard it ached. "I didn't know what to do," he admitted, his voice cracking. "I thought maybe I did something wrong." My stomach twisted. I turned onto our street, forcing myself to stay in control. I wanted to rage. I wanted to scream. I wanted to burn everything Laura and her perfect little life to the ground. But right now, Jake needed me to be calm. I pulled into the driveway and turned off the engine. I turned to face him, meeting his wide brown eyes. "You listen to me, Jake," I said, voice low but firm. "You did nothing wrong. Nothing." His lips pressed together. "Your mom and Greg and your grandparents?" I shook my head. "They were wrong. They were the ones who messed up. Not you." His chin wobbled. He was fighting tears. I reached out, gently cupping the back of his head. "You are not a kid people leave behind," I told him. Not ever. I will always come for you. Always. The tears finally spilled over. He let go of his backpack, throwing himself into my arms. I caught him easily, holding him tight, one hand rubbing slow, calming circles on his back. He cried into my shoulder, little hiccups shaking his small body. And I just held him. Because this was what Laura had done to him. Because this was what I was going to make her pay for. Once Jake had calmed down, I got him inside, settled on the couch with a grilled cheese sandwich and a cartoon playing on low volume. I tucked a blanket around him, watching as he slowly started to relax. His small hand clutched the edge of the fabric like it was an anchor. Good. He was safe. But this wasn't over. I stepped into the kitchen, pulled out my phone, and dialed the first number. David. The voice of my lawyer, Nathan Cole, came through the line, groggy but alert. It's late. What's going on? They left Jake at Disneyland. Silence. Then, excuse me? They left him. Alone. At a table. Told him to wait there, and walked out of the park. I let out a slow breath, barely holding my fury in check. I have surveillance footage. Disneyland security has a full report. The police are already involved. Nathan swore under his breath. Tell me everything. I did. I told him about the phone call, the surveillance video, how Laura laughed when I confronted her. And by the time I finished, Nathan had only one response. David. Yeah, we're taking them down. The next morning, I sat in Nathan's office, every piece of evidence laid out on his desk, the security footage, the written statements from Disneyland staff, the police report. I watched as Nathan went through each one, his expression darkening. Jesus, he muttered, rubbing his jaw. This isn't just negligence. This is child endangerment. I leaned forward. Can we take full custody? Nathan looked up, eyes sharp. We're going to try. A slow smile spread across my face. Good. By mid-afternoon, Laura's phone was blowing up. She got a call from the police requesting her to come in for questioning. She got a notice from Child Protective Services. An official investigation was being opened. And then, she got served legal papers. Nathan made sure they were delivered right to her doorstep. By the time she called me, she was screaming. Are you out of your goddamn mind, David? I leaned back in my chair, my voice calm. No, but maybe you are. What kind of mother leaves her son alone in a theme park? I told you, we just forgot. I laughed, a low, dangerous sound. No, Laura. You didn't forget. You abandoned him. It's not that serious. Oh, really? I tapped my fingers on the desk. Well, let's see. The police think it's serious. CPS thinks it's serious. The judge I'm about to stand in front of thinks it's serious. Silence. I could hear her breathing heavily. You won't win, she finally hissed. You think you're some kind of hero? You're just bitter because I moved on. I smiled. Oh, Laura. What? Enjoy your last few days as a mother. And I hung up. That night, as I tucked Jake into bed, he yawned, snuggling deeper into his blankets. His voice was small, but hopeful. Dad? Yeah, buddy? Can I just stay with you forever? I swallowed the lump in my throat. I smoothed his hair, leaning down to kiss his forehead. We'll see, kiddo. I smiled softly. We'll see. But deep down, I already knew the answer. I sat in my car, phone in hand, staring at Laura's number on the screen. The conversation we were about to have, it was going to change everything. I'd spent the last hour going over everything with Nathan, my lawyer, my bulldog, my right-hand man in this war. We were already in motion. Legal papers were being filed. A restraining order was on the table. CPS had been notified. The police had begun their investigation. Laura just didn't know it yet. And the best part? She thought she was untouchable. So when I finally hit call, I leaned back, relaxed, letting the anticipation simmer. She answered on the second ring, her tone sharp. David, I swear to God if you... I cut her off. Where's Jake? A long pause. Then a laugh. Oh, really? Didn't notice. She was mocking me. Mocking him. Before I could speak, Greg's voice. Asterisk asterisk the arrogant bastard. Asterisk asterisk cut in from the background. Good kids never get lost. I saw red. My entire body tensed, rage simmering just below the surface. It took every ounce of self-control not to unleash hell right there on the phone. But I didn't, because I had a better plan. So instead, I chuckled. Soft, slow, dangerous. Laura? My voice was calm. What? I leaned forward, letting her feel the weight of my next words. You have no idea what's coming. And then, I hung up. The next morning, Laura's world started to unravel. It began with a knock on her front door. She answered in her silk robe, probably expecting another online shopping package. Instead, she got served legal papers. She was being sued for full custody. The documentation was thick. Pages of evidence, including the Disneyland security footage showing her walking out of the park without a second glance at Jake. Witness statements from multiple staff members who found him alone and crying. A formal police report stating that Jake was found dehydrated and in distress. A CPS complaint under child endangerment. Her perfect, curated life? Shattered. Greg, standing behind her, squinted at the paperwork, confusion turning into panic. What the hell is this? It's nothing, she snapped, flipping through the pages. Her face paled as she reached the end. A court summons. An emergency custody hearing. And at the bottom, a request for a restraining order preventing her from seeing Jake until further investigation. Her hands shook. Greg snatched the papers from her, skimming them quickly. This is bad, he muttered. Really bad. No, it's not. She swallowed, shaking her head. David is just trying to make a scene. He won't win. But Greg wasn't so sure. Because deep down, they both knew I was coming for them. By mid-afternoon, the story had already spread. Margaret and Richard, her parents, the so-called high society elites, were at their country club when the news hit them. A fellow socialite, an old friend of Margaret's, approached her at brunch with a polite but pointed smile. So, I heard about Disneyland. Margaret frowned, setting down her mimosa. What about it? Oh, just that your grandson was found alone in a theme park while you were. What was it? The woman tapped her chin in mock thought. Ah, yes. Shopping. Margaret's smile faltered. Richard set down his newspaper, stiffening. Who told you that? The woman just sipped her drink, eyes twinkling with amusement. Oh, darling, she said sweetly. Everyone's talking about it. And just like that, their reputation, built over decades, began to crumble. They tried to do damage control. They called Laura in a panic, demanding to know what was happening. We left him for 5 minutes, she insisted, gripping her phone. David's just blowing this out of proportion. But Margaret wasn't convinced, because by that evening, their names were all over social media, and the internet was not forgiving. Laura had built her brand on the perfect family image. Instagram, carefully curated photos of her, Greg, and Jake in matching outfits. TikTok, fake candid moments of Greg tossing Jake in the air, captions reading, blended family goals. YouTube, parenting advice videos where she spoke on putting your child first. But now, her comments were flooded with rage. You left your kid alone at Disneyland? How does it feel to be the worst mother in America? Protect Jake at all costs. CPS better take her kid away. Her follower count plummeted. Sponsors started pulling out. One by one, the brands she worked with cut ties with her. And when Greg realized their entire income was vanishing overnight, he lost it. You told me this wasn't a big deal. Greg snapped, pacing their living room. Laura sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone, her face twisted with stress. It isn't, she muttered. People will forget about it in a week. Greg turned, eyes wild. Our bank account doesn't have a week, Laura. She glared at him. I have savings. Yeah? For how long? He threw his hands in the air. Do you even know how much money we just lost? Our mortgage alone? Laura clenched her jaw. Then, her phone rang. She brightened for half a second, thinking maybe it was a brand offering damage control. But when she saw the caller ID, her stomach dropped. CPS. She froze. Greg noticed. Who is it? She hesitated. Then, her phone rang again. Her lawyer. Greg's face darkened. What did you do? Laura's hands shook as she answered, and the moment she did, her entire world collapsed. That night, as I sat in my living room, watching Jake peacefully play with his Legos, I felt a rare moment of peace. Because I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, Laura was done. She just didn't know it yet. I picked up my phone, scrolling through the news, the legal updates, the social media fallout. Everything was going according to plan. I glanced at Jake, smiling as he made his action figures fight. "Dad," he looked up. "Yeah, buddy? Can we have pancakes tomorrow?" I chuckled. "Of course, kiddo." And for the first time in a long time, I knew she wasn't going to hurt him ever again. I woke up early the next morning, but I didn't feel tired. I felt focused, laser sharp. Today was the day I took everything from Laura, just like she tried to take my son from me. Jake was still asleep in his room, his small figure curled up under his Spider-Man blanket. I paused at his doorway, watching the slow, steady rise and fall of his chest. Safe. He was safe. But if I didn't finish what I started, if I didn't tear Laura's world apart the way she deserved, that safety wouldn't last. So I walked downstairs, made myself a black coffee, and pulled out my phone. Time to start the fire. Nathan had everything prepared. By noon, I was in his office, reviewing the final custody paperwork. "This is airtight," Nathan assured me, flipping through the pages. "The security footage alone is damning, but coupled with the police report and CPS's investigation, she doesn't stand a chance." I nodded. "What about the restraining order?" "That hearing is set for next week. Until then, we already have a temporary order preventing her from seeing Jake." It wasn't enough. I wanted permanent. I wanted her erased from Jake's life. I leaned forward. "And if she tries to fight it?" Nathan smirked. "She won't win. The judge won't take a risk on a mother who abandoned her child, especially not with this much evidence." I exhaled. Good. I signed the final page, pressing the pen harder than necessary. "File it." Nathan didn't hesitate. He scooped up the documents, stood, and left the office. It was done. And now? I was ready for step 2. Laura cared about 2 things: herself and how other people saw her. So while Nathan was handling the courtroom, I was going to burn down the rest of her world. I pulled out my laptop and opened a private message to one of the biggest parenting influencers in Los Angeles, a woman Laura used to admire. I attached the Disneyland security footage, the police report, the official CPS complaint, and finally, I typed, "I think mothers deserve to know the truth about one of their own." Then I hit send and sat back. It took less than an hour for it to explode. By late afternoon, the video was everywhere. People saw the footage. They saw Laura walking away. They saw Jake sitting alone at the table, waiting. They saw her abandon him. And the internet tore her apart. Laura's phone rang 19 times before she finally picked up. "What the hell did you do?" she screeched the moment I answered. I sipped my coffee, enjoying the sound of her panic. "I don't know what you mean," I said smoothly. "Don't play dumb, David. My social media is ruined." I smirked. "Maybe you should have thought about that before you abandoned our son." She let out a frustrated scream. "You're going to regret this." "Am I?" I set my mug down. "Because I'm feeling pretty damn good right now. I'm calling my lawyer." "Oh, your lawyer?" I chuckled. "You mean the same lawyer who's about to get steamrolled in court next week?" Silence. She knew. She knew she was screwed. "By the way," I added, "you might want to check with your sponsors. I think most of them just dropped you." More silence. Then, a choked sound. I checked my phone. Screenshotted her biggest sponsorship deal posting an official statement. "We do not condone child neglect. We have terminated all partnerships with Laura Pierce effective immediately." I sent it to her, just to twist the knife. Her breath hitched. I could hear the devastation settling in, and I felt nothing but satisfaction. "You bastard," she whispered. I grinned. "You should have never laughed, Laura." And then, I hung up. Later that night, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Laura. It was Greg. I smirked. Finally, I let it ring a few times before answering. "Greg," I greeted casually. What a surprise. There was no arrogance in his voice now, no mocking laughter. Instead, he sounded exhausted, panicked. David, listen. No, you listen. I cut him off. I'm taking full custody. Your wife is about to be labeled unfit. CPS is watching her like a hawk. Your money is gone. Your reputation is shot. A pause. Then, in a quieter voice, can we work something out? I laughed. Oh, how the tables had turned. You're asking me for a deal? I shook my head. Greg. You stood next to my ex-wife and laughed about my son being abandoned. You have no leverage here. David, you were fine with all of this until it blew up in your face. He sighed heavily. I didn't think it would go this far. Well, I mused, I hope it was worth it. And then, I hung up on him, too, because Greg was irrelevant. He was nothing more than a passenger on Laura's sinking ship, and I had bigger things to focus on, like my son, the best revenge, a happy life. When I got home, Jake was waiting for me at the kitchen table, scribbling something on a piece of paper. His eyes lit up when I walked in. Dad, look. He held up the drawing, a stick figure version of me and him, holding hands, big smiles. I felt something in my chest loosen, something that had been tight since the day I got that phone call from Disneyland. You drew this? I sat down next to him, ruffling his hair. Yeah. He nodded proudly. It's us. Because we're a team, right? I swallowed the lump in my throat. Yeah, buddy, I said softly. We're a team. I meant it. And nothing, not Laura, not Greg, not anyone, was going to change that. Her phone was vibrating nonstop, her notifications stacked so high that her screen froze trying to load them all. She had over 200 missed calls. Her email inbox? Flooded. And her social media? A disaster zone. Her perfect, polished Instagram feed, once filled with staged family moments, curated vacation photos, and heavily filtered parenting advice, was now being torn apart in real time. Thousands of comments had flooded her latest post, the one where she had smilingly posed in front of Disneyland with Greg and Jake, pretending to be the perfect mother. But now, every comment told a different story. You abandoned your kid at Disneyland? What kind of mother does that? Protect Jake at all costs. She shouldn't be allowed near him ever again. You've been lying to us this whole time. You don't deserve to be called a parent. CPS needs to take her rights away. Now. Her follower count plummeted. 500,000 followers, 300,000 within 24 hours. 200,000 within the next 2 days. By the end of the week, less than 100,000 remained. But that wasn't the worst of it. Her sponsors, the brands that made her money, that gave her the lifestyle she flaunted, were dropping her like dead weight. Pottery Barn Kids? Gone. The Honest Company? Terminated contract. Her biggest clothing sponsorship? Issued a public statement distancing themselves from her. One by one, every deal collapsed. And without those, Laura had nothing. No influence. No brand. No income. Her entire empire, built on deception and an artificial image, was crumbling in real time. Laura sat in her pristine kitchen, phone in hand, staring at the screen in horror. She could hear Greg pacing in the living room, muttering angrily under his breath. But she couldn't focus on that, because a new email had just landed in her inbox. Subject, emergency meeting, CPS case review. Her blood ran cold. She clicked it with shaking hands. Dear Ms. Pierce, following the incident at Disneyland, a review has been initiated regarding the safety and well-being of Jake Carter. Due to the severity of the situation and documented evidence, you are required to attend an emergency hearing to determine custody arrangements moving forward. Date, Monday, 9 a.m. Location, Los Angeles Family Court. Failure to appear may result in immediate loss of custody. This case is now under official investigation. Regards, Child Protective Services. Her hands started shaking. Her vision blurred. This couldn't be happening. This wasn't real. But it was. And suddenly, she realized exactly how badly she had screwed up. Laura, what the hell have you done? Greg's voice boomed through the house. She flinched as he stormed into the kitchen, waving his phone like a weapon. Have you seen this? He shoved it in her face. The screen showed a viral post, the Disneyland security footage now circulating across every social media platform. The footage showed her clearly walking away. Greg, Margaret, and Richard all laughing as they exited the park. Jake? Left sitting alone at the table. It was undeniable. Greg's face was pale with fury. I lost my job over this. Laura's stomach twisted. What? My boss called this morning. His voice was cold, bitter. Told me they don't want the PR nightmare. I'm fired. Laura's mind spun. No, 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 this can't. Oh, it can, Greg snapped. Because unlike you, I actually worked for a living. But thanks to you, I've lost everything. She scoffed. Don't blame this on me. We're in this together. Greg let out a dark, humorless laugh. No, Laura. You dragged me into this. I was fine before you and your influencer bullsh *T. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. And now? We have no income. Her chest tightened. Her bank account had shrunk significantly since the sponsorship started pulling out. Greg saw the panic on her face. His eyes narrowed. Wait, he stepped closer. How much money do we have left? She hesitated. Laura. She swallowed hard. Enough. His jaw clenched. How much? She licked her lips. Maybe $40,000. Silence. Then, Greg snapped. You bitch. She flinched as he grabbed his keys, his face red with rage. I'm done, he spat. I didn't sign up for this. Where are you going? She shouted. He laughed, shaking his head. Away from you. And then, he walked out the door. Laura sat in stunned silence. Greg, her husband, her backup plan, her stability, had just left. And for the first time since this started, she felt true fear. She called Margaret, then Richard. Neither answered. Instead, she got a text. Margaret, we need to step away from this situation. It's affecting our reputation. Laura's chest tightened. She called again. Straight to voicemail. She wasn't just losing sponsors. She was losing everything. Her family, her security, her entire life. By Monday morning, she walked into the Los Angeles family court looking like a ghost of the woman she used to be. Her hair, once perfectly styled, was now dull and lifeless. Her expensive clothes didn't feel like armor anymore. And when she looked across the courtroom, she saw me. I was calm, collected. I had Nathan at my side, and I had all the evidence I needed. The judge didn't even hesitate. Based on overwhelming evidence of neglect, abandonment, and endangerment, full legal and physical custody of Jake Carter is awarded to David Carter. Laura gasped. This court further finds Laura Pierce unfit for primary custody. Effective immediately, all visitation rights will be restricted to supervised visits only, pending further evaluation. I smirked as Laura went pale. She had lost everything. And me? I had one. By the time the media was done with her, she had nothing left. Her house was foreclosed. Her social media empire collapsed. She tried to rebrand, tried to start fresh. But the internet never forgets. She became a cautionary tale, a lesson in what happens when you choose clout over your own child. And Jake? He never asked about her again, because he was too busy living a happy, safe life. Without her, I walked into the Los Angeles family court that morning with one goal: to end this. Laura had spent years manipulating, lying, and crafting a false narrative about who she was. But today, the truth would finally destroy her. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't afraid. Because for the first time since this nightmare began, Laura was the one on the defensive. And I was going to bury her. She arrived 30 minutes late. Flustered, disheveled. Her usual polished appearance was gone. Her hair, normally styled to perfection, looked messy, unwashed. The designer suit she wore couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes. Greg was nowhere to be seen. Her parents? Absent. She was alone. And the moment she stepped into the courtroom, her eyes locked onto mine. Pure hatred. I smiled. She knew. She knew this was the end. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes and no patience for games, called the court into session. Nathan stood first. Your Honor, he began, his voice steady, powerful. We are here today to present overwhelming evidence that Laura Pierce is unfit to retain custody of Jake Carter. We will show, through surveillance footage, witness testimony, and legal reports, that she has displayed gross negligence, reckless endangerment, and a fundamental failure as a mother. I stole a glance at Laura. Her jaw clenched. She knew what was coming. Her lawyer, a middle-aged man with a permanent look of stress, stood next. Your Honor, my client deeply regrets the misunderstanding that occurred at Disneyland. However, we argue that this was not neglect, but simply a miscommunication. Ms. Pierce has been a loving, devoted mother for years and Nathan cut in immediately. Your Honor, we object to the use of the word miscommunication. This was not a miscommunication. This was abandonment. The judge narrowed her eyes. I'll allow the objection. Continue, Mr. Blake. Laura's lawyer cleared his throat, flustered. Simply put, Ms. Pierce believes this case has been blown out of proportion by Mr. Carter in an attempt to alienate their son from his mother. I almost laughed. Alienate? Laura did that all by herself. Nathan didn't waste time. He walked up to the large screen at the front of the courtroom and pressed play. The footage from Disneyland. The courtroom fell silent. Laura sat stiffly, her fingers gripping the table, as the video played. 2:15 p.m. Laura patted Jake on the head, said, "Wait here," and walked away. 2:30 p.m. Jake still sat alone, looking around for her. 2:45 p.m. Laura, Greg, and her parents were seen exiting the park, shopping bags in hand. Not once did she look back. Not once did she check on Jake. When the footage ended, Nathan turned to the judge. This video alone is enough to prove neglect. But we're not done. He gestured toward the Disneyland security officer, who stood beside him. This is John Martin, the supervisor of Disneyland's guest services. He was the one who found Jake and filed the initial report. The judge nodded. Proceed. Nathan approached the podium. Mr. Martin, can you tell the court what you witnessed that day? The man cleared his throat. I was notified by park security that a young boy was found alone in Adventureland. When I arrived, Jake was sitting at a table, clutching his backpack, looking visibly upset. He told us he'd been waiting for his mother to come back, but she never did. Nathan nodded. Did Jake appear to be in distress? Yes. He was crying. He was hungry, and he repeatedly asked when his mom was coming back. I clenched my jaw. Laura refused to look at me. Nathan continued. And when you checked your surveillance footage, what did you find? That his mother, stepfather, and grandparents had left the park without him. Silence. Then, the judge's steely voice. Ms. Pierce, do you have anything to say? Laura shot up from her seat. This is ridiculous, she snapped. I love my son. I would never abandon him. The judge lifted a skeptical brow. The video evidence suggests otherwise, Ms. Pierce. Laura turned, eyes wild. This is David's doing. He's been trying to turn Jake against me for years. I sat back, arms crossed. No, Laura, I said calmly. You did that all on your own. The judge sighed, rubbing her temples. Ms. Pierce, do you have any actual defense besides blaming your ex-husband? Laura huffed. This isn't fair. She turned to me. David, please. I didn't blink. I'm the mother of your child, she continued, voice softening, eyes shining with fake tears. We've been through so much. You don't really want to do this, do you? She reached for my hand. I didn't move. You know me, she whispered. You know I love Jake. This is all just a misunderstanding. Nathan leaned over, whispering under his breath. She's desperate. She was, because she knew it was over. I let her hand hover in the air before I finally spoke. Laura. She brightened, thinking she had one. I smirked. You should have picked up the phone when Disneyland called. Her face fell. The judge looked unimpressed. This court finds Laura Pierce unfit for primary custody. Laura gasped. As of today, full legal and physical custody of Jake Carter is awarded to David Carter. Tears welled in her eyes. Wait. All visitation rights, the judge continued, will be restricted to supervised visits only, pending further evaluation. No, you can't do this. Laura pleaded. David, please. I stood. You left him, Laura. Her face crumbled. And just like that, she lost everything. Jake and I stood in the kitchen, making pancakes. His laughter filled the air as he tried flipping one himself, nearly sending it flying. I caught it before it hit the ground, shaking my head with a chuckle. Nice try, kiddo. He grinned. I'll get it next time. I ruffled his hair. I'm sure you will. For a moment, he was quiet, stirring the batter absent-mindedly. Then, his voice softened. Dad? Yeah, buddy? He hesitated. Do I have to see her again? I sighed, setting the spatula down. Not if you don't want to. He nodded slowly. Okay. Then, with a small smile, thanks, Dad. I exhaled, relief washing over me. Because in the end, the best revenge wasn't taking Laura down. It was making sure she never had the power to hurt him again. And as long as I was around, she never would. It had been a year. A full year since I walked out of that courtroom with sole custody of Jake. A year since Laura lost everything. Her rights as a mother, her social media empire, her marriage, and whatever remained of her dignity. And I had one. Not just in court, not just legally, but in the way that mattered most. Because Jake, he was happy. And that was all that mattered. Dad, can you cut the crust off my sandwich? Jake's voice rang through the kitchen as he sat at the island, kicking his legs while munching on a piece of fruit. I chuckled, picking up the butter knife. Sure, buddy. But remind me again, why do you hate crust? He scrunched his nose. I dunno. It just tastes weird. I playfully narrowed my eyes. You're gonna have to start eating it one day. He shook his head dramatically. No way. Not happening. I smiled, finishing his sandwich and packing it into his lunchbox. The same simple routine, the same peaceful mornings. A normal life. A life where he didn't wake up scared. Where he didn't feel like he was walking on eggshells, waiting for his mom to prioritize herself over him. Where he didn't wonder if he was good enough to be loved. Now, he knew. Because every single day, I showed him. She hadn't been in Jake's life for months. At first, she tried. She called. She begged. She swore she'd changed. That it had all been a mistake. That she deserved to be in his life. But Jake? He didn't want her back. He cried the first few times she called, confused, torn between the mother he wished she had been and the reality of who she was. But then, the calls stopped making him sad. And one night, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, he turned to me and asked, Dad, do I have to talk to her? I studied his face, his small fingers picking at the edge of his blanket. I took a slow breath. Only if you want a kiddo. He thought about it, then shook his head. I don't. And that was that. Laura lost him the day she walked away. She just hadn't realized it yet. One afternoon, I got a knock at the door. When I opened it, a woman stood there, a caseworker from Child Protective Services. She gave me a polite smile. Mr. Carter? I nodded. Yeah, that's me. She flipped through a folder, then handed me a document. This is the official report closing Laura Pierce's case. I scanned the page. It was final. CPS had finished their investigation and determined that Laura was not fit to have custody, now or in the foreseeable future. Her rights weren't completely terminated, but she'd never be able to get unsupervised visits. And considering Jake didn't want to see her, she had no way back in. I met the caseworker's eyes. So, what does this mean for her? She shrugged. That's up to her. But from our side, she lost. I nodded, exhaling slowly. I already knew that. But seeing it in writing, it felt like the final nail in her coffin. One day, about 6 months after the court ruling, Jake came home from school beaming. Dad, guess what? I grinned, setting down my work. What? He threw his backpack on the couch and bounced excitedly. I made the soccer team. I blinked. You tried out for soccer? Yeah. He nodded eagerly. Coach said I'm really fast. I chuckled, shaking my head. That's awesome, buddy. And it was. Because this was what mattered. Jake wasn't afraid anymore. He was doing normal kid things. Trying new activities, making friends, laughing like he was supposed to. He wasn't the scared little boy sitting alone at a table, waiting for his mother to come back. That version of him was gone, replaced by a kid who was thriving. And I wouldn't trade that for anything. It happened by accident. I was out running errands, grabbing groceries for the week, when I saw her. She was standing in the checkout line, alone. No expensive clothes, no designer bag, no Greg. Her hair was tied back in a messy ponytail, and she wore a hoodie that looked 2 sizes too big. She looked tired, older. The years hadn't been kind to her. When our eyes met, she froze. For a moment, she looked like she wanted to say something. Maybe to beg, maybe to fight, maybe just to prove she still had some power over me. But she didn't. She just looked away. And that was the last time I ever saw her. One night, as I tucked Jake into bed, he stared at the ceiling for a long moment before speaking. "Dad?" "Yeah, buddy? Do you think she's sorry?" I sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe." He was quiet. Then, "I don't think it matters." I blinked, surprised. "No?" He shook his head. "Because even if she is, it's too late." I felt something tighten in my chest. Not in a bad way. In a way that told me Jake had finally moved on. The best revenge? A happy life. A year after I won full custody, we celebrated with a trip to Disneyland. Just me and him. No distractions. No anxiety. No waiting. We ate too much food, went on every ride twice, and stayed until the fireworks lit up the night sky. And as we stood there, watching the colors burst above us, Jake grinned up at me. "Best day ever," he said. And I smiled. Because I knew. He meant it. He wasn't pretending. He wasn't forcing a smile for a camera. He wasn't waiting for someone who would never come back. He was just happy. And in the end, that was the only win that mattered. Laura thought she could walk away from our son and never face the consequences. She thought her image mattered more than reality. She thought she was untouchable. She was wrong. And now, she was nothing more than a bad memory. Meanwhile, Jake and we were moving forward. Happy, healthy, together. Because the real lesson in all of this? Karma always comes back around. And when it does, it doesn't leave room for second chances.